Hello, dear listeners and viewers. You're here for another live episode of Lex Talk About It. Tonight, we are very excited. I have some new guests, some fresh faces for you guys. But before I introduce them and get into that, I do want to mention to our viewers live and those at home listening or watching on YouTube that we are accepting donations for Stop Pipeline 3. So you can donate through us tonight, or you can donate by going to stoppipeline3.org if you are listening to this after the live recording. And Pipeline 3 is a pipeline for a tar sands crude oil being pumped from Canada down through the Americas. And all of that money and oil is going back to France. None of it is going to the economies and the ecosystems that it's potentially ruining. And not only is it an ecological disaster waiting to happen, it also is violating several treaties with the Anishinaabe Ojibwe peoples. It is cutting through several bodies of fresh water, including our largest body of fresh water, the Mississippi River, 3 times at minimum. So it is very imperative that we educate ourselves and we support our water protectors out there on the front lines and call our representatives and do everything that we can to stop this travesty before it happens. A little bit about tar sands is that it is the most dangerous, most dirty type of crude oil that triples carbon dioxide output because they have to spend lots of money and chemical processes in cleaning it before they're ever able to use it. And when the pipeline springs a leak, because as we know, it's not if a pipeline leaks, but when. So when this pipeline were to leak, the oil, instead of sitting on the top of the water, will sink to the bottom, mix with sediment, and be carried by this river to the Gulf of Mexico, devastating as many ecosystems as it can as it runs through them. This is imperative stuff. And if you want to know more, you can look into the TikTok accounts of a couple of really great water protectors. You have UG Gruna, which is UGRUNNA. We have A Gold Wolf, that's A__ Gold Wolf, and Black Snake Hunter. All of these are indigenous peoples who are on the front lines trying to protect our waters and our land rights. So please do the time, educate yourselves, and donate if you can. All of that being said, today we are here to talk about mythology, folklore across the world and how it's similar and how it affects us today. And my guests all have very unique perspectives and interests in these fields. I have with me today Joe. Joe, introduce yourself.
Hi, so my name is Joe Arianis. The little sit sprite in my lap is Toll. And my current area of interest is Shinto and the yokai and kami that inhabit that space over in Japan in their mythologies, as well as learning more about Native American myths and legends. But just like many, many people, I started off with like Greek, Roman. I love Assyrian and Babylonian. My hands down favorite goddess of all time is Ishtar.
Yes. I also have with me Erin Go Play. You might recognize her from her Mass Effect live streams here on the channel. Erin, introduce yourself.
Hi. My name is Erin. That's really simple. Currently, I have been researching more on the Panhellenic pantheons. Hello. This is Persephone, who will not get out of camera.
Why should she?
She sees no problem with it. But I've also done a lot of research and a lot of interest in various, actually African, predominantly in the Asian field, but also some more of the Southern African mythologies, particularly spawned by the fact that at one point I was in love and still am with Rhodesian Ridgebacks. And if I got an African lion hunting dog, I wanted to name it an African lion hunting African name, and needed to research them to understand what I was doing and not just be like, here's some random African sounding name that has nothing, like, that would be rude. Yeah. I would not do that. And also a lot of the Norse mythology.
Yes. And joining us for the first time of what I'm sure will be many times, we have Kim. Hello, Kim. Tell the people about yourself and why you love mythology.
Hi, I'm Kim. I am from the UK. I originally born in Edinburgh, moved around a lot, lived in Yorkshire, so I have a lot of ties to the Viking background. Studied a lot of sort of Norse Greek mythology. Recently moved back sort of like 3 years ago to Scotland after some time in Canada, some time in London, some time in New Zealand. So a lot of really cool backgrounds, and I'm just really dedicating myself to sort of reconnecting with my roots, learning a lot about the Celtic mythology, trying to sort of bring all that history and heritage back to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just saw two of my friends join the chat. Hi, V. Hi, Lully. Lovely to have you guys here. Super excited to get into this. So basically, I guess let's start with like, what is your favorite myth? Like, what is the myth that sparked you to like, oh God, I have to devour everything that there is to read here? Being the host, I guess I'll go first. My introduction to like mythologies other than the Christian mythology was Greek myth, as it is for pretty much every queer that I know.
It's me. I'm queer.
Yeah, very much that. And the first myth that I read, and I'm actually surprised now because like less people know about this than I thought. Like I thought this was somebody everybody knew, but was the myth of Apollo and Hyacinth. And so like this was one of the first stories and positive like representations I had ever seen of a queer relationship. And I was like, oh, that's possible. And so I just started devouring everything I could find. And like, turns out most of the dudes from Greek mythology are fuckboys, but that's also kind of what I loved about Greek mythology, is that the deities were so incredibly human. It wasn't this kind of like, yes, they had, so much power and so much this and so much that, but they were very human in the way that they were angered, in the way that they sought retribution, in the way that they loved, in the way that they did all of these things. It was very human. And that wasn't something that really got attributed to, in Christian mythology. So it was really interesting for me to like actually be able to relate to the gods and to like read stories like that.
That's 100% the same thing that happened to me. Like, it's the sort of the vulnerability of them, the fallibility of them, and that resonates through Norse mythology and Roman mythology as well. And that's why I ended up in those paths too. It's just like, they're not trying to be these perfect beings that have an answer for everything. Like, oh, it's just a test of God. They were just jealous or horny. And sometimes they were horny.
Just sometimes.
Just like the odd occasion I heard Zeus was a little bit like, he liked to
like all of Greek mythology is Zeus, don't stick your dick in it, and Zeus going, nah,
I'm gonna stick my dick in it.
Yeah, I'm like, everybody's like, Zeus no, and Zeus like, Zeus yes. That's Greek mythology. So now we're done. See you later.
I have a thought about that too, though, like thinking about it and thinking about like this whole podcast or this whole like episode and everything, and thinking about the differences between like Joe specifically, like the Eastern mythos, like the Chinese and Japanese sort of mythos, and the way that they treat their gods compared to the way the Greco-Roman, the Hellenistic, a lot of the more European centered pantheons treated their gods as this much more human sort of being, and how that kind of does impart on our culture with the idea that in a lot of Western societies, you are trying to become a god, like whether you actually are or not. It's very self-centered in the idea that like you could do enough to become a god because they are so human based. Whereas with a lot of Eastern mythos, they're still fallible, but they're not as approachable, or they're not as much a person as a force of nature.
Mm-hmm.
In the sort of Greek mythology particularly as well, it was something that was attainable if you did enough heroic deeds. Hey, look, we've raised you up to Olympus, or now you're a constellation. Like that was
Zeus
a straight
loved to turn somebody into a couple stars. Like, and that's But Joe, what about you? What got you into the mythos, into the myth world?
Wonder Woman.
Yes.
Yes.
I really have a way around that. Wonder Woman. I was fascinated by this idea that goddesses made a hero together.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. As a little girl, growing up in the fucking Bible Belt of the South.
Hello.
In the Catholic Church and all those messages. I was the odd one out in school that I was reading comics pretty young. Hand-me-down, like I don't even know where I got my first comics from. But I was fascinated by the idea that the goddesses came together and made this amazing hero that saves the world time and time again. And so I started reading everything I could about Greek mythology to be like, surely there's someone else that's similar to this. And like, what about another woman? And come to find out there really has never been, except for Athena. And I was like, she came out of his head? What does that mean? What the shit? And she was just an adult. Like she got to bypass all the bullshit of being a kid. That's cool. What? But then it's like, oh, but dudes are doing everything. And even like the goddesses get truncated.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you go from Greek to Roman, like the role of most of the goddesses is diminished significantly, especially when you look at Athena.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I was really turned, like, this is getting towards like middle school and high school. I got really turned off by that. And that's when I started looking into Assyrian and Babylonian, wandering across that continent into some Chinese and Korean, eventually clichely landing on Japanese mythology right around the same time I was introduced to anime through Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke. I kept wanting to say it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Princess Mononoke, I was like, what the shit is happening? Like, it's a very visceral experience of me being like 13, 14 years old. No, it's like 14 or 15, because I was definitely at public school now, which what the shit? After being in like cloistered little Catholic private school until 8th grade, and then like get punted into one of the largest public high schools in Arkansas. Like that was intense. Anyways, I remember standing there in front of my TV with Princess Mononoke on. I'd missed like the first 5-10 minutes of it. So it's like, I don't know what shit this is. How do cartoons look like this?
Right.
Story. That is really violent. That's blood. They're shooting guns. Like this is not like any cartoon I've ever seen before. What are these what's Kodama? What does Kodama mean? What is this forest spirit? Like forest spirit makes me think of like the Native American stuff that I know very little about at the time. But like, that's eerily similar to like the Navajo stuff and the Hopi stuff and the Quapaw stuff. And like, okay, what is this? And so then that launched me into like Far Eastern and really digging into Shinto, because if you don't know this already, like Princess Mononoke is steeped heavily in Shinto ideals and principles. Anyways, that's been my little journey.
Yeah, and that's something that is actually like super interesting to me. Like when you look at some of the mythologies and some of the like spiritualities, one thing that's like super common among indigenous groups is this animism. Like one thing that is super central to Native American spirituality is the fact that everything has a spirit. You know, everything is a being that is worthy of respect, and that is, you know, and like we talk about like using the whole animal, and like yes, that was a thing a lot of the time, but there were also other specific practices like where like beaver bones are always returned to the water. So they didn't, and like that's not all tribes, but people of the beaver clan, like they always returned the bones to the water rather than using them to make needles or beads or anything like that. Like those were returned to the water. They had to be returned to the water, and this is what you did. And you know, you didn't like just steal and take from the land. Anytime you took something, you then replaced it, or you didn't take more than you could for that plant or being to survive. And there's similar concepts, you know, in like Hinduism and in a lot of African spiritualities, and you even see it in some Indo-European spiritualities and some of the indigenous groups of Europe. And there's this whole like concept of animism, and it's so interesting to look at that versus when you look at like Greco-Roman ideologies and Christian mythologies. So like within, you know, the Greco-Roman, it wasn't like this thing of animism, but you didn't necessarily take too much of this or too much of that because you would anger the god that is then like, no, that's mine. Like I have purview over that and you didn't give me enough offerings, so fuck you. Versus then when you go and then you take that and then you move into this, you know, Christianity, and Christianity, we were made to have dominion over the earth. And so like nothing has a soul except for humans, and like everything else is just supposed to be for us. And it's so interesting to see how we go from here to that.
Yeah, it's in talking about the Greco-Roman and like the idea that like you have to give so much tribute in order to take whatever, so much of a donation. It's really the idea starting back in Greece, let's say, that everything is for sale. That really kind of permeates a lot. You know, we took their gods, essentially. We kind of took their ideas behind democracy and like kind of modeled a lot of Western society on this ideal. And it's just not funny, but it's just very interesting to see how that still transfers over, that in a lot of Western societies that's based on this society in general, this whole idea that everything is for sale and everything belongs to someone, not just is there for the greater good. Is very...
Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say it's very interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Christianity is like mapped a lot of its entire existence by just stepping on pagan holidays, by stepping on other religious holidays, by trying to take parts that were already celebrated and be like, actually, do you know, you're not celebrating that, you're actually celebrating this. And it's like, they have no grounds for this. They have no basis for it. They're just like, oh, well, that's actually ours now. And what you're doing is this.
It's the same thing that happens within white supremacy of like it has to expand to encompass things that are non-Christian. Like Christianity, in order to actually like gain a foothold and start to build power, had to expand itself to encompass things that had nothing to do with it, so that then it could be attributed to it. And they were so successful to the point that like I have conversation like as a like, so I was like raised in the church, like we covered that, but like I'm a full blown heathen. Well, not a heathen because that's specifically like a Norse practitioner, but I'm a pagan, I'm a witch, I'm spiritual. And like I had a conversation with somebody about Easter, and like that's Ostera, like that's a whole ass pagan holiday. It's a fertility celebration. That's
different than Ishtar. I see shit shared every year around Easter about Ishtar being Ostara. And I'm like, get your fucking shit straight. Because by all means, it's Ishtar, but bitch better know that is some intense ass sex coming your way, and no guarantee that baby is coming out of it. You are going to make love and war to whomever you look at next if you're going to start praying to Ishtar.
Hello.
You want a baby? Ostara is your lady, and that's different.
Right. Yep. And but you have this thing of like Christians not even questioning the symbolism that they use in these things. Like, why do you think it's a fucking rabbit and an egg?
Yeah, no, so I was raised Jehovah's Witness. And
oh shit.
Yeah.
I knew it was wild. I didn't know it was crazy. Like, I'm kidding.
So, actually, the Ishtar, Ostara, like that is very muddled, but that was actually my first introduction to like a different set of gods, because Jehovah's Witnesses, a big part of why they don't celebrate any holidays is because they are very aware and actually talk a lot about how the holidays and the traditions around them were stolen from pagan traditions. And so they're like, no. We're not doing that because that is not a part of our religion, and we're not using these stolen things. And that's just like sacrilege. But I mean, like, kudos to them for not using, like, on the one hand, a lot of right. Not kudos for a lot of other things.
there's a lot of things we will not give them kudos for, but at least they didn't appropriate culture. And like, right. But like even down to birthdays, like birthdays are a pagan tradition that Jehovah's Witnesses do not practice. And there's even
that's a different like reason in their
okay.
That's
I know that there's like an obscure Bible verse where it talks about like not celebrating that sort of thing, and it's
the only two. There are only two instances of celebrating birthdays in the Bible, and one of them is when, oh God, I forget his name. Anyway, some princess asked for the head of John the Baptist on a platter for her birthday, and the other one is something similar, like it's another massacre that happens or somebody gets killed, and so. As a general rule, they're like, they don't necessarily say don't celebrate birthdays, but the only two times that they show them being celebrated, it's by pagans, and it is detrimental to our Christians. So obviously, if that was important enough to include it in the Bible, we shouldn't celebrate it.
Yeah.
You know what? It's my birthday in like 2 days. I didn't know I could ask for somebody's head on a platter. I'm going to have to change a lot of plans.
Who?
You know, there's a lot of...
because that gets rid of plausible deniability.
You're right.
Also, if you say your wish out loud, it doesn't come true.
Oh, okay. You're right.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like, but yeah, just to like...
Also, how to choose in this day and age, how to choose.
There's so many words.
Ow.
We can take Philip and Margaret off that list at least. But no, like truly, like it's and it's so interesting also like the way that these things still shape us, like especially when you look at like Greco-Roman mythologies and stories translated to like Western culture today. Like we still use the same, like, what is it, 2737 story blueprints that they laid out, like, you know, and like the way, and I will say like the way that Western and like white people write is different from the way that indigenous communities write, and the like we tell stories in different ways. And I think it's super interesting because like when you look at it, like even going back to Greece, like there's usually a linear progression of the story. Whereas within indigenous communities, it's more based in like interest and emotion. So like you'll get different pieces at different times, and like you'll be coming to one thing and then it calls you back to before this thing was starting to happen. And so like they tell stories in different ways and for different reasons. There's also very much a difference in the way like indigenous peoples approached their like spirituality and their like deities. Like Native Americans don't really have deities, but that it's and
real personas or archetypes.
Yeah, like spirits and that's the thing is like you're in Native American spirituality and mythology. The spirits are not separate from us. Like it's not they're not this like class of people that just sit and judge and rule. No, like they are actively a part of us. They are helping us. They are here to help us grow and flourish. But so often in like Greco-Roman and in a lot of Indo-European, like in a lot of like European spiritualities, there's like this fear of gods, which is then again translated into Christianity. I'll put the fear of God in you, right? Like, what? Why? Like, because like even with Celtic lore and mythologies, like Morigna, like the Morrigan, like she is, you know, she/they, because really it's a title. It's not like one person. It's a triple goddess, and it's not always the same three people. Like sometimes, you know, it is three aspects of one person, and sometimes it's three sisters. Sometimes it's three gods that aren't like strictly related, but like everybody's kind of related in Celtic mythology. And so it's just so interesting because even though she is warlike and chaos, like people still worshipped her to a greater degree than like the Greeks worshipped Ares. Like Ares, like, you know, dude bros today want to be like Ares, blah, 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 blah. Oh, he's so powerful. The biggest like worshipers he had were Sparta, and Sparta was a small empire because the class of people that they kept as slaves outnumbered them like 10-1.
Yeah.
And gay AF
As fuck, to the point that the women were encouraged to cut their hair short in order to help their husbands get used to sleeping with a woman.
not only cut their hair short, but the marriage night happened in the middle of the, like, they didn't see their wives during the daylight until after they had consummated because they wanted to be able to pass for boys.
Yeah.
But that is very, it's very similar to, so it's actually very interesting to bring that up because the like Southern African, like the parts of Africa that weren't connected almost to the Pan-Hellenic, like not Egypt, basically, not the big Egyptian gods that we all know.
Right. Like,
or, well,
not the north.
I assume everyone in this chat knows, not necessarily everyone listening, but I'm assuming that none of us are going to be like, who's ISIS?
Isn't that terrorist cell? Like, no, girl.
I saw ISIS at the airport.
Yeah. But they have very similar to more of the indigenous cultures as well, you know, where like all of their gods are spirits that nature and embody both the good and the bad aspects of nature. So it's very interesting to see how the different areas all develop.
And even when we look at and we look at like archetypes too, right? It's like, you know, so many spiritualities have these gods that like fulfill similar things and like have similar archetypes, like but like do it very differently. So like you can look at Coyote versus Loki. Like they're both, you know, mischievous spirits. They're both that aspect of kind of mischief and chaos. But Coyote isn't mischief for mischief's sake. Coyote is a teacher because, like, at the end of the day, like most Native American spirits are there to teach and nurture, and the way that they do that can be very different. But like with Coyote, his mischief is there to either teach the people a lesson or protect the people. Like he's not out here putting Thor in a dress and saying, "This is Frigg, don't worry about it." Like
that is my favorite Norse myth of all time, and it will be till the day I die. It's
so good.
It's my favorite. And if they said Chris Hemsworth Tom Hiddleston, we need you to do this. Hands down, they'll be like, yeah, we'll do it. Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
my favorite Will Smith. But
And
the
it's
duality,
interesting, the difference is in Anansi there too, you know.
Yeah.
Who is,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Like Anansi is like the trickster. And
Yeah.
like but also like, you know, he is there to, you know, he is also in a way there to protect the people and teach them, but also like I think Anansi is kind of like, I don't want to like make him an analog to, you know, Loki or anything like that, but like, you know, there's this kind of like middle ground that happens within Anansi. Like he definitely had like some mischief and some self-gain going on, but he also had a lot to like teach the people. And like it's very interesting when we look at like, when you like look at that and then you look at the cultures of the people who are doing this thing and who are telling these stories, and it goes back to the way that like indigenous peoples, in particular those of like Africa and the Americas and the American Caribbean, like their you know culture and spirituality was like take care of the community. Like it wasn't this sort of like individualistic mode of thinking. It wasn't like self-preservation above all. It was preservation of community to preserve self, because if we're all taking care of each other, I don't have to worry about myself. But yeah, like but even going back into like Norse myth, like it's something, these are all, you know, spiritualities and you know, mythos that are known. But the thing is like there's so many different, like especially when you look at like Norse and Greco-Roman, like different people told different stories. The myth of Persephone is told very differently amongst different people, and like there's a version there, the earliest mention we actually have of Persephone doesn't mention her as Kore at all. It doesn't mention Demeter. It just mentions her as the regent of the underworld. It mentions her as the one doling out the punishment, like and it's not until later that we receive the story. There's a story of her, you know, finding the underworld on her own, but there's also, you know, the story of her being kidnapped. But also like there's the cultural knowledge of back then, like if your parents did not approve of the partnership, if they didn't approve of the marriage and you did it anyway, that was considered an abduction, that was considered a kidnapping. So like the accounts of whether or not she was a willing participant or duped into this sort of relationship vary. Same with Medusa. And I'm sure like Kim could tell us a lot about the variations of Norse myths.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting twists on the way that we perceive them, and a lot of different, like the way that Odin is perceived, even, and everybody I think knows Odin. If you don't, he's the reason we have Wednesdays. Woden's Day. Played very well by Ian McShane in the adaptation. He was a very, very good Odin. But he's the All-Father. There's a lot of people that just kind of expect him to be this very foreboding, very like all-powerful, like the stereotypical this is a god. He's gonna smite everybody, etc., etc. But he goes and he hangs himself from a tree in to sacrifice for knowledge. He hands over his eye. There's people that will have different interpretations of that, and like bits were taken from him and things like that, but it generally is that kind of duality of like he's sacrificing versus he is being sacrificed.
Yeah,
and just that idea that he sits there and he's like, oh, I'm the all-powerful, I'm the almighty, and yeah, he does have that kind of personification about him, but not to the same extent that you would think of the one god in Christianity. Like he does delegate, he does have different, and like everybody thinks he's the god of war, and he does have that tie in with battles, but actually Freya is the goddess of war and sex. So you have those contradictions all the way through it, and I love that she is both war and sex. And cats. I just love it.
It's incredible. And like talk about the fact that like Valhalla is second choice. Freya
Yeah.
is the one who created the Valkyrie, and Freya gets first choice of the fallen. Valhalla is just the hall of Freya's rejects.
Yeah, exactly. It's Odin's chosen warriors, but that's only from Odin's perspective.
Right, exactly, and that is another thing that's so interesting. And I know that there's a thing in Japanese mythology and culture where they call them the there's a reference to the gods as a bureaucracy in Japanese.
That's Chinese.
That's Chinese. Okay.
I don't know as much about that, because that gets so layered and complicated so fast. There's parts of it where there's a ranking system involved.
Mm-hmm.
It gets super complex when you start talking about the Chinese mythology, because it also changes by era or dynasty. And there's gods and goddesses that fall in and out of favor based off of the dynasty that's going on, because in their mythos, certain gods and goddesses support different families or tribes. That's not quite the right word, but in support of overthrowing power, and thus the breaking and rebuilding and breaking and rebuilding.
Yeah.
The gods help them do that. Anyways.
And there's a similar phenomenon in ancient Greece where you had household gods, and your family, your household, in particular worshipped these gods all the time, and then you would give offerings to other gods if you were looking for other things. I was
going to say with Chinese, it's such a diaspora as well, because it is such, the Han Dynasty came in and they centralized language, and we're like, haha, all Chinese people are Han people now, because we centralized language. But
not how that works.
but literally to this day, in Chinese, it's Hanjin, it's
yep.
But it's so dispersed, and so many pockets where there are such different mythos. And then you also have the idea that came in with Chinese, where they had women's writing and women's tales, which were done separately, and was a whole different type of writing and a whole different language even that was developed just because women weren't allowed to write. I mean, they weren't allowed to write Hanwen.
Right.
So the mythos that come out of the women's writing are completely different to the mythos that come out of the men's writing. And so trying to understand anything with Chinese mythology is a very giant task.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in Japanese mythology specifically, the hierarchy gets really abstract, because, again, anything can be kami, and part of Shinto. So for people more unfamiliar with it, you have the torii, which is the gates, and that is always a line of demarcation of past this point is where you will find kami. This is where you will find the gods. They live, they sleep here. But it gets weird because oni, yokai, kami, all of that is within the spirit world, and they kind of all mix together. And the hierarchy is there's basically nothing, and then you have named gods like Izanami, Izanagi, Amaterasu, Susanoo, on and on and on. But then there's also people who have been elevated to the level of gods as well. And that gets super abstract because it's kind of similar to sainthood and Catholicism, that it is after the person's death, their life is examined, and society as a whole is yeah, they were really awesome and they made the world so much better, so we're going to give them this title. And so there's historical figures in Japanese history raised to the level of kami, or a god, and they actually have shrines and things like that dedicated to them, and it's always around a topic.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of where the bureaucracy kind of sneaks in. But again, it's not formal canonization like in the Catholic Church for saints. It's just people collectively are like, yeah, that person was badass and like so much more than just human. They had to have been a god. So we're just gonna
and that can be like, and to my understanding, like that can also be like super regional as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, like the gods acknowledged in shrines down in Okinawa are not going to be the same acknowledged and enshrined in Hokkaido, and it gets wild, and without completely geeking out, like there were more indigenous tribes, because if you're not realizing this, Japan is made up of hundreds to thousands, I'm forgetting the exact number, but thousands of islands, and you don't see the majority of them. Most people know Japan as just being that one big crooked island thing that's kind of snaking around, and no, there's islands dotting all the way up near Russia and all the way down going near Australia. All of that's and so
that's a big reason why there are so many Asian and Japanese people in Australia and New Zealand, is because like they have islands that are right there.
Yeah, it's just it's a little hop, skip, jump, like closer than thing, to America. Sorry, international people. But so a lot of the islands that were clustered together would have their own indigenous way of practicing a very naturalistic, shamanistic way of life. Then there was lots of wars, lots of bickering, lots of everything that created the Japan that we know now, and
lots of colonization and annexation. Like, here's the thing, dear listener, if you didn't know, Japan is a colonized empire. Like, they colonized parts of China at one point. Like, and all of this kawaii like culture is very intentional rebranding.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
it is new. That shit is
new as hell.
New.
So fun story that is not related to mythology, but how bad Japan was. For my college, one of my college classes, I wrote a 20-page paper on the rape of Nanjing.
Oh my God.
And yeah, no, I had to take regular breaks to stop and look at puppies. But it was actually, they were so bad that literally the person who saved the most Chinese lives in Nanjing was a Nazi who was writing to Hitler to be like, excuse me, dude, but this shit is bad. Like, he literally, he was the German ambassador there under the Nazi regime and like a high-ranking SS, and basically just turned his whole property into a refuge because he would not risk pissing off the Germans by touching anything on his soil. So he turned his yard into and was writing Hitler about how bad the Japanese were.
Yeah, and like not to stay on that for too long, but that's why I have a real problem with any kind of media and like adaptations coming out of America specifically, but like literally anywhere that like addresses Pearl Harbor, because they don't have any concept of like what kamikaze pilots really were. Most of them were children. Almost all of them were doing this against their will. Like, this wasn't like some sort of like volunteer, like, no, like, it was awful, like, for everyone involved. And so Japan is not the cute, like, funsy place you think it is.
Beautiful. There's a lot.
Oh, absolutely beautiful, gorgeous, and yeah, but there's so much like indigenous culture there as well. Like, a lot of some of it has like been, like assimilated and colonized, but
most of it has been, is the sad part. There's only a handful of indigenous tribes that still hold on to their roots, and that's in the farther edges of the total archipelago of Japan, and the rest has been assimilated into itself. Like Japan kind of colonized itself. Oh my God. Sorry.
You're fine.
How dare you?
Colonized itself, and like they tried to homogenize things together, and it got a bit icky in places. And the wild part is technically because of Buddhism. That because Buddhism's migration into that archipelago, the indigenous people are like, well, our stuff is similar, but it's not that. That's talking about death all the time, which, okay, cool, we can talk about that, but this is life, this is nature, this is different. So we're this way because we're not that. And so this is also why Buddhism and Shintoism are strangely entwined in a way that you really don't find other places in the world. That you can ask just about any Japanese person, like, what religion are you? And they're like, and we're not talking. But if you say, are you Buddhist? They're like, yeah. Well, are you Shinto? Yes.
Yeah.
And it's because Shinto is about life and Buddhism is about death and the afterlife and that process. Anyways, I need to call my father back. I'm sorry.
You're fine. Do what you need. But yeah, like that, and that's something that's really interesting too. And like, and also like let's look at histories and things like that. Like the fact that like all of the most mythologies in the world like have a flood story. Like I know that like there is one from Norse myth, but I'm not familiar with it.
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But I know that it exists.
Yeah. And I know that in like South American, a lot of the like there's a belief in the South American like indigenous peoples of this serpent who was a god of storms in the sea and like had a fight with the sun god, and the sun god saw fit to let him win, and it flooded that area. And it's really what like just to like, and that's one thing that you can look at like that's one thing that gives us like footholds into history without a whole lot of evidence, because if all of these cultures all over the world have some kind of mythology that centers around a flood, clearly there was a great flood that happened, despite the fact that we have like actual like fossils of aquatic animals on the tops of mountain ranges that tell us even more. It's like, oh yeah, like this shit was real. This isn't just some story that everybody thought up and was like, yeah, that'd be cool if there was a story about a flood. Like, it's just really interesting the way that you can glean insights on like actual historical events from mythologies.
I'm pretty sure there's one in Irish mythology as well, but I don't know that one off the top of my head either. I just know that there is one. I know the Norse mythology is kind of not so much a flood of water. I think it's a flood of blood.
I mean, that checks with their cult.
Yeah, like ideas. They killed a guy, and his blood flooded the frost giants, and then one of them got away or something.
Speaking of blood in Norse mythology, like I have ADHD and my brain makes weird ass connections.
I'm here for it.
One thing that a lot of people don't know, because like their introduction to Norse mythology is like Marvel Comics or the MCU. One thing that a lot of people don't know is like Loki isn't Thor's brother. He's Odin's blood brother. Like that's who the bond is made with.
That's another variation that springs up, and it's one is that he was taken and raised with Thor, which becomes more popularized because of the MCU. And yeah, then there's the origin story of him being they were warriors, that kind of brother in arms kind of thing as well.
And I find all these things sort of like very interesting, and especially like when you and the way that people like have adapted them, and then the adaptation becomes the reality in some senses. Even when you look at like Medusa. So like when you look at the myth of Medusa, like that one is really close to my heart for a lot of reasons, but also just like, you know, it's the men who tell. We only really have the one account of it being a punishment from Athena. There are accounts of, you know, Medusa always having been a Gorgon, and the thing that Athena gifted her was the stone sight. Like Gorgons existed like as a race of people, like harpies did. Like they were just like reptilian women who were beautiful, but also like monstrous at the same time. And you know,
beauty
she was
is in the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. Hello. But yeah, and so like, but like when women told the myth of Medusa, like it was a gift bestowed on her by Athena to prevent that from ever happening. And like shelters and safe spaces for battered women and abused people used Medusa's head as a signifier of what they were.
It's just a very interesting take that they always attribute very strong jealousies to female goddesses. Hera is probably the most notorious for it in Greek mythology. But to say that we have Athena who was celibate, who protected women, who was about wisdom and that sort of sanctity, as well as the warrior that she was, to think that she saw this rape happen in her temple because it was rape.
Yeah, absolutely.
In most stories, it was rape. There's some
Poseidon and Zeus are fucking rapists.
Yeah, 100%. And like, there's some people that are like,
challenge you to find a Greek god who isn't a rapist.
Oh yeah,
Hades.
Yeah, I mean any of the celibate ones, to be fair.
Yeah, like any of the celibate ones, to be fair.
But yeah,
I was specifically talking about the male gods more than Hades would be.
Yeah. It's like this is Athena's temple. She is one of Athena's, in some interpretations, she's one of Athena's most devoted servants. One of her most devoted women of her temple. To think that Athena
like she was a high priestess.
Yeah, to think priestess. That was the word I couldn't think of.
Got you.
For people to just assume that Athena would turn around and be like, well, no, you brought this on yourself. I'm going to punish you now. Like, why would she do that? Why would she immediately blame Medusa for that?
Especially if you're looking at her as a goddess of wisdom, like, and
exactly.
Who immediately was like, yeah, no, I'm not having a dude. She knew what dudes at that time were up to.
Yeah, like her dad is Zeus, her uncle's Poseidon. Like, yeah, she knows what's going down.
Yeah, and even down to like we're talking about different variations. Even like with Athena's origin, there are myths that like she's completely immaculate and like just came out of Zeus's head. But there's another myth. Her mother is a Titan. Her mother is Metis, and what happened was he had already like promised himself to Hera and was like, okay, and like they had gotten rid of the other Titans with the exception of like Hecate and a couple of others. But what he did was exactly what Kronos did. And so he like blew out his insides and swallowed Metis whole, not realizing that she was pregnant. And so she gave birth to Athena inside of Zeus. And then once she started getting bigger, she placed Athena in Zeus's head. And so once she became too large, he had a headache and Hephaestus came down and like banged on his head and like busted his head open and released her.
Yeah, there's another variation of that where he turns her into an insect and swallows her that way.
Yeah, like there's all sorts of myths that like don't get explored or told because they have now, you know, been changed and whatever, and then passed down through male storytellers who like don't care to dig in more.
The biggest slander that's ever happened to Greek mythology is the fucking Disney film Hercules. Like, Hades down there being the worst guy ever, Zeus up there being the best guy ever. How dare you?
Zeus is a great family dad. Family man.
Fun sidebar. My main D&D character is called Panic. She's a tiefling. Her sister's called Pain.
Incredible. I love Pain and Panic. And Pain and Panic, I feel like we're supposed to be this like weird adaptation of Phobos and Deimos.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. But yeah, like it's so funny when you look at the ways that, because like Hades in most of his myths is just like chilled out. Like he makes contracts and he holds people to their word.
He's not like death. He's not Thanatos. No, he doesn't go around and collecting the souls. He is a paper pusher. He's a bureaucrat. He sits behind a desk and he signs paperwork and he rages about it. And that's about it. Like that's
and
it.
Really what he is he's the god of riches. Like because his dominion is over the earth and everything in it. Like so like he is the god of riches, of precious gems, of things, and like he's not, and that's why he's always about keeping your contracts and balancing things. But and that's why you have to like entreat him, and when you take, and that's why you put 2 gold coins on someone's eyes, because that's, you have to pay the ferryman to like get through like and retain part of yourself. And like there's so much rich world building within the underworld, but because this entered kind of the Christian world, they had to then, give that the same.
That's hell. That's bad.
Yeah.
And they completely eradicate that it's not even just like Hades. Like that's not the domain. There's like different levels to that different people go to. There's Elysium, which you could compare to Valhalla if you so wished. You have all of those different aspects.
Yeah, there's Elysium, there's
Tartarus,
which is both a titan, and that's the thing as well. Like Tartarus is a titan as well as a place. Like the place is named for him.
Yeah,
we're talking about the underworld, and Persephone appears.
Of course, as she
was summoned.
Should.
Yeah. Do you know what? I play the game Hades a lot, and the whole point is to get through. You go Tartarus, then Elysium, and I've forgotten what it's called.
Of course it just left me too. But yes, I know where you are. I know where you're headed. Yeah.
But that's another interesting twist on Greek mythology and its players.
Yeah. And that's
great things about that. I haven't played it.
I haven't played it yet either. I'm going to, for sure. But what's so interesting is the character that you play as Hades' son, Zagreus. His full name is Zagreus Dionysus. Yeah. And like he is a separate entity from Dionysus, but is mostly a footnote in Greek myth.
You got Asphodel. I had to Google it. It was going to drive me crazy.
Yeah, and there's only of the like maybe 4 myths that Zagreus Dionysus is mentioned in, there's only one that he is referred to as a child of Hades. And so it's very like, and it's very tangentially as well, because like the translations of things and the ways that words were used in Greek are very different. Like there were, especially in ancient Greek, like sometimes when you were referring to like a son, you were they were referring to just a close relationship with a younger man or somebody that you were mentoring.
Or your young man rape victim.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that translates a lot into like the sort of relationships that men had in a lot of the Greek myth, that it was this kind of like older mentor, younger mentee, and that was like they also boned. Like
yeah, and it was
consensually and non-consensually.
Yeah,
I mean, so that's I would say non-consensually, because it is all about pederasty, and like there is a phrase, an old ancient Greek like scripture that's like, there is no more divine place than between a young man's thighs, and like they would have these relationships. I mean, they would start when they were like 12 or 13. That's rape.
Of course.
That's not consensual.
And the other thing is like we talk about like ancient Greece and Sparta and stuff like being gay as fuck, but the thing is like it wasn't, because those concepts weren't really a thing.
No.
Like and the other thing about like it was also like common knowledge that the younger man, the mentee, isn't might not experience arousal and that during your coupling, and that's fine. But also you weren't supposed to have more than one at a time. And there is a documented case of, I think it was Plato fucking around on one of his mentees, and his mentee like fought him about it, like literally publicly fought him about it. And as was his right to do, because like you're taking all of these things from this young man. Like you take him away from his family, you take what you want from him when you want it. Like he is supposed to be your focus. He is supposed to be the person that you're educating. He's supposed to be the person that you're feeding. He's like, you're supposed to be doing all of these things. And so for you to step out like that is not cute. And like, it's so interesting.
I just like saying that it's gay as fuck to fuck with all the people all the macho men who are like, Sparta was great. Yeah. And it's like, okay.
The Achilles and Patroclus relationship falls onto that category, depending on which perspective you're looking at the Achilles and Patroclus relationship from. Have you read a song for Achilles?
Song of Achilles! I am gay.
I think that Lex has.
I am gay and in pain, but let me tell you my favorite quote about ancient Greece and like myth comes from that book, and it's the exchange between Achilles and Patroclus, where he talks about like can you think of one hero who was happy? Name one hero who was happy.
Yeah.
You can't. They don't let you be famous and happy. I'll be the first one because of you. And it's like, and it's a Song of Achilles is so beautiful. Go to your local library, go to your local bookstore, pick it up, read it, and be in gay pain with me.
Yes, I mean, I am. Yes. Circe.
Circe, yes.
Oh, Circe, that
also
was amazing.
Outstanding. Same author. She's Madeline Miller.
Yes, Madeline Miller.
Yes, amazing.
She's incredible. And like Circe is another one that like is super interesting when you look at her myths and you look at, because she only appears a couple of times, and her biggest, appearance is in, Homer's epic. And they mention her as a daughter of Hecate, I'm pretty sure. Or no, she's not related to Hecate. She has different parents. It's the sea monster that is.
Yeah, she's water deity based because she is the potential reason that one of the most prettiest water nymphs got turned into some horrible like monster at the bottom of a whirlpool.
Wasn't it Scylla that she got turned into?
Yes. Yep.
There are two monsters. One of them is the daughter of Hecate, and the other is that nymph. It's super interesting. And like, I don't know, like and there's so much that we will never know. Like when we look at like Mesopotamian mythology, like the little bits that we have, like, there's so much history and culture. And then you look at the gods that kind of crop up in Greek mythology because they like conquered people. They didn't colonize people. So it was just like, we'll just add it in. Like, that's fine. You keep doing what you're doing, pay your taxes, it's fine. And so we see these sorts of these traditions and these myths like enter Greek mythology a type of way that's super interesting. And I am going to have to run to the bathroom. I am so sorry, but I'm going to throw it to you guys. And I will be right back.
Jumping back a couple of topics. There years ago now. 2018. Netflix produced a show called Troy: Fall of a City.
Okay.
And because of how Lex quoted the book, I think they used that book for part of this script because, again, one of the big reasons, because whenever I read Iliad, I always took words and names are going to come out of my mouth eventually. Please,
Who needs them?
They like each other, right? And of course, like my Catholic teachers were like, shh.
Yeah.
About that. Okay, now I'm really confused. But, you know, a lot of modern media just kind of leaves Patroclus out, and that's super sad. But then,
yeah,
bringing up Fall of a City is they have that scene between the two of them, and it was heart-wrenching. I just remember being like, I don't remember a lot about the show. I thought it was good at the time, and it was super entertaining, and I love that they approached that relationship being like, no, those two were together. They were also portrayed as equals in that, but I remember that gut-wrenching moment of like they were having this intimate thing, this conversation, and I'm like, but he's about to go die now. No.
One of the really interesting ways they portrayed that in A Song for Achilles was through sort of like the depiction of Patroclus at the beginning. He becomes exiled. He sits away from Achilles. He kind of watches Achilles, who has never struggled to make friends. And then Achilles kind of comes to match Patroclus rather than Patroclus going up to match Achilles. And they go together through that. And by the end, when they're fighting the Trojans, he is well loved, he's well liked, he's well known. The people of the camp know him not because he's a great hero, but because he dedicates himself to helping and healing. Mm-hmm. And he is the balance to sort of the power and the slaughter and the fierceness of Achilles, and that equality was really powerfully portrayed in that book. I think
it really was.
Cool. I think it would be a little bit remiss too, though, if we're talking about Achilles and Patroclus, to not mention Alexander and Hephaestion.
There's one.
And you know, especially if we're talking about mythology being brought into kind of the real world. Ancient history at this point, obviously, but you know, it was very much on record that you know, there were times where Hephaestion would go to meet with leaders of these countries that they were conquering or to broker deals, and Alexander would send him in his stead. And there was one that has been recorded very well where the king, I don't remember who he went to, but he got very angry and he was like, I was supposed to meet with Alexander, who the fuck is this? And so Alexander showed up like a week or two later and he was like, I am very insulted. And Alexander's like, why? He's Alexander as well. Like anything he says, I say, like, it's fine. He can do. The literal quote is, he too is Alexander.
Yeah. It's like when Karen asks to see the manager and then the manager comes out and like just agrees, like, no, he says what he says is what I'm saying. I support what he says. The reason that this person is my person to tell you this stuff is because they know it. Get out of here, Karen.
But they literally went together to the tombs, I'm sure, of Achilles and Patroclus and laid wreaths upon them together. And so
it's relationships looked so, and the stories looked so different before other people got their hands on them. And that's what's so interesting is these things kind of get perverted to the point that people think that like this is just common knowledge, and like Indigenous American folklore and spirituality and knowledge is going through a similar thing right now, where like, you know, people think Wendigos and other, you know, spirits and stories that we have are open reign and that they get to just like adapt these stories. And no, you don't. These things are sacred. This knowledge is closed. And like there are things that we don't mention out loud and for reasons.
It's not like
I'm losing you, Joe.
Joe, we can't hear you.
Words have power, and there's just some things you don't say.
Yeah.
It's like those people that stand in front of the mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times. Like they think that it's like this almost like a game to challenge these like scary ghost stories, but that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then
Different.
yeah. And then you have places that still very much know and believe these things. Like when we look at the Appalachian Mountains, like, you know, the history and the folklore there is crazy. And I know I mentioned that I want to talk about this because like, this is the oldest mountain range in the world. Like carbon dated. It's true.
Yeah.
Like,
isn't parts of it like in Scotland?
In Europe.
Because
yes. Yes.
Just
so
from the
when
way
you
that they
had,
cracked.
Yeah, when you had Pangea together, so basically what it does is it snakes up all the way through North America, goes through some islands, and then ends up also in the like Scottish Isles and I think some in the Dutch area
I
as
know that
well.
I know
Where
that
did
Norway has a very similar sort of
Yes.
coastline and sort of indigenous
and
species
so
and things to Scotland.
Yeah, and so when you look at, you know, the peoples that occupy that area today, number one, they're incredibly impoverished. The people who live in the North American legs of the Appalachian Mountains are incredibly beneath the poverty line. But there's also a whole lot of folk magic that goes on in the Appalachian Mountain regions, and it pulls from several different spiritualities. There's a lot of like European sort of spirituality and knowledge that happens there. And then there's a lot of like indigenous knowledge, and they've kind of created this like new pantheon and this new kind of like spirituality and practice. But yeah, like there are stories in indigenous cultures of like those mountain ranges being prisons for, you know, spirits that had gone dark, and aspects of nature that creator and the stone people and the sky people all said no. And just and then, you know, you had, you know, white industrialism come in and break these mountains open for coal mining and things, and just take and take and take. And this is where we start to hear stories of the land being angry. And we hear stories of these earthquakes, these landslides, these things that had no reason to happening and like taking over and taking swaths of the community out. And it's just, it's so interesting and rich with like culture, and it's just so neat to see the way that these things survived. Like they're still alive today. Like it's not just stories. Like these are things that people still live.
And it's very interesting to see in Appalachia, especially Joe and Lex. I'm sure you have been there, at least gone to Helen. I lived there for a bit up in Cleveland, Helen area in high school. But it's such a deeply entrenched in Christianity area as well. Mm-hmm. So to see the way that these people have married these folk witchcrafts, to be quite honest, with their Christian beliefs, and have managed to find a way to marry them together is very interesting.
And things, go ahead.
That they try to negate the naturalistic, more pagan aspect of what they're doing. That's why you have old wives' tales. And like, grandma always did this, so I do it too. Yeah. And it, you know, like iconography of one thing, but then we have these practices of another just because this is how it's always been done. Like it gets really weird really fast.
Right. Yeah. Like raise your hand if you've heard these things, and chat, throw me up a hand emoji if you've heard these things. But, you know, not sweeping somebody's feet, or they won't get married. If your palm is itchy, money is coming to you. Don't set your purse on the ground because you won't have money. Like all of those things, like, are rooted in hoodoo. All of those things are actually rooted in like African spiritualities. And these are ways that that knowledge kind of like stayed around in these and this like kind of like, I don't want to say folklore, like it's knowledge. Like this stuff like stuck around in different ways. It's taken on a different aspect now. And like you have these uber Christian Black mothers like telling people not to sweep their feet, and they don't understand like that's rooted in where you came from. Like that's rooted in your actual, like in your ancestral spirituality, not in Christianity. And it's not just some old wives' tale. Like there's a story behind that.
My mom's family is from South Louisiana, like coon-ass Cajun, like the most. My great-grandfather did not speak English until he was in high school. My grandmother was called Thibault for petite ball because she was a little chubby growing up in her hometown. Like,
Yeah.
Very, 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 very Cajun. And so my mom got married before her sisters. And they had to jump the broom because if a younger sibling gets married before you have to jump a broom in order to have good luck. But these are also the same people who, like, when my grandmother wanted to take a break between having her first 3 children and her last 2, she had to go to the priest to get permission because she was so Catholic.
Yeah.
And so like these 2 things are married together somehow.
And without getting like too much into it, like voodoo is also like, it is a blend of voodoo and like hoodoo, like African spiritualities, and Catholicism. Like the the spirits that they
Super Catholicism, like,
oh yeah, like that's
anyway, like entrench, like dig down to the marrow and root that up and then blend it in, like
yeah, like that's why Marie Laveau, the original Marie Laveau, was able to like be as prolific as she was, is because the things that she was doing were steeped in Catholicism. So the church was like, especially the church in Louisiana, was very much like, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. Like it's okay. And like not full sail okay with it, but they weren't like out here after her. And the, you know, spirits that you connect with if you are initiated in voodoo are Abrahamic in nature. Like it's not this like yes, it is a closed practice, and it, you know, has roots in both like African spirituality and Catholicism, but like it's not the same thing as the Orisha. Like it's a completely different pantheon. And it's just so interesting the ways that, you know, these cultures adapt to survive.
Yeah. Yep.
Like I'm sure, like, aren't there's still a lot of like, even though Ireland is like hella Catholic now, like there's still a lot of like Celtic practices that survive in some shape.
Yeah, I don't want to talk too much on Ireland.
That's fair.
It is a very, very complex system, and the Protestants, the Catholics, and the sort of pagan history as well is very, very highly entrenched in the people, and people have very, very strong opinions on them, and rightly so. There's a lot of, but I mean, just to look generically at some of that, like you have the Saint Patrick mythology, which is pretty well known. He drove all the snakes out of Ireland, but Ireland doesn't have snakes. So it's like the allegory of it being tied to the Druids, because snakes are a symbol. People always think snakes are evil, but that's just fucking rude in my opinion.
Read.
But yeah, it's pretty symbolic of like, hey, look, our savior, St. Patrick, came and he drove away all the snakes that were actually just the native druidic and pagan people that were just trying to live a nice, quiet life. But here you go.
Yep. It's wild. It's all kinds of stuff like that. And like I'm honestly like I'm more like I'm not as well versed in like Scots myths either, though, like because like while yes, you know, Celtic, but they're all different types of Celtic.
Yeah, it's even there's a lot of sort of connections as you look from one to the other, and you can see where they all line up, and like things like the water horse mythology, kelpies,
Yes.
etc. You can see, hey, here they are in Irish, here they are in Scotland. Whoops, nothing in England, but here they are in Welsh. Like you can see those staggerings across it, but in variations, kelpies are very much Scottish in origin and tend to be more well versed in the Scottish narrative. But yeah, you can see the similarities, but the variances. But like part of Northern Ireland was very much like a Scottish invasion.
Sorry, I just got crop dusted by my dog. She literally dropped a terrible fart and then walked out the room.
I've been outstaged by a bloody dog.
Oh man. But yeah, it's so interesting when you look at that, and there's, you know, similar things among like indigenous cultures, like, you know, specifically, you know, like I know, you know, I'm learning more and more about, you know, my ancestral knowledge and things like that. And specifically, you know, I'm Diné or Navajo and Cherokee. And, you know, there are things that the Eastern Band of Cherokee practices and teaches, and there are things that the Western Band practices and teaches, and there are similarities, but they're not the same. Mm-hmm. And then because, like, here's the tea, chat, like, I know you probably were told that like Native American people were at war with each other constantly and savagery and blah, blah, blah. But the real tea is that like we didn't have wars the same way that Europeans did, number one. And number two, I know like the Arawak specifically only have like 2 recorded wars in their history with other tribes. And like there was such a like intermixing among tribes that like we had a universal sign language for trade. Like you know, a lot of people are familiar with dream catchers, and there's something that appear, you know, in a couple of different tribes, but they originated with the Ojibwe. They originated with the Anishinaabe people. And the reason they exist in other tribes is because we traded heavily with each other and we intermarried. Like, it wasn't something that was, you know, not done. And so like our knowledge and our, you know, stories, like we share similarities. Like I think, you know, Thunderbirds are something that are pretty common among, you know, all of the tribes of the North Americas. And, you know, there are certain things that are like kind of like common among us. And then there are certain mythologies that are like specific to certain tribes. And I think it's probably like a similar phenomenon among the different Celtic clans.
Yeah.
And the different, you know,
the Shetland mythology around werewolves, which is they're called wolvers in the Scots mythology, is that instead of it being sort of like a human that transforms, blah blah, it's the body of a man with the head of a wolf. And instead of being this horrendous creature that goes and eats people and blah blah, they would actually take fish generally, but food, to the houses of those who most need it, and leave those packages for them so that they could eat and survive. And that's like one of my favorite. Like, you don't hear that about werewolves anywhere.
No.
That is a Shetland story, and it's actually what I'm going to be doing my main thesis on, is going to be a film around the legend of the wolves. And I'm probably going to take myself to Shetland to do that, because I feel like I owe it to Shetland to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's like, no one hears that. No one knows that story. Like, and it's very straight up Scottish. Like, and I think it's the most Scottish thing we could do. Like, oh, scary werewolf. Do you want better? Here's a nice werewolf. Bye, guys. Oh, England's got shitey werewolves. We'll give you Gideons. Bye. And that's like the basis of it. But it's obviously not. I'm just being a dick. But
no,
yeah,
but
it's a very like, it's a very, very different take on a very commonly known mythology.
Yeah, and like even like, and that's what's like, there are, were creatures in a lot of different mythologies.
Oh, yeah.
The indigenous peoples of South America had myths, and usually surrounding jaguars, because jaguars were super sacred to them.
Yeah.
And Joe, we are like losing your audio. Sometimes I get you, but only when you speak. Most of the time, like I think it's just you have to speak up or something. I don't know. But I just wanted her to know that, because she's been like interjecting a little bit and I can't hear her. But yeah, like, there are like were-jaguars within South American culture, and then there is a mythos that we won't speak about from North American indigenous peoples that does it for darker reasons. And but then you look at what's really interesting to me is the differences for how to like kill or cure a werewolf, and the different ways that werewolves are made. Like there's the myth that like drinking water from a wolf's paw print under a full moon is what triggers the change. And there's, being able to be cured of being a werewolf by someone who loves you calling your Christian name. Like there's so many neat, like, yeah, fuck the Christian name thing. But like, there's so many different like mythologies that spring up around the same idea, and it really just harkens back to the fact that like we're all a universal people, and there are these like universal stories, and like these stories still affect us today, even in like the way we pray. Like look at the way like Christians pray and the way like ancient Greeks prayed. Like ancient Greeks prayed and it was threefold. So it was the entreating of the god, like calling out to them, reminding them of like your relationship, whether that be former service to them, or like just reminding them of that familiarity. And then there was like the actual asking of the favor. And like you still see that in like the way that Christian Americans pray. It's very much like, our Father who art in heaven, like hallowed be thy name. Like that's the entreatment. And then it's like, may everything I do be in service to you, like blah, blah, blah. Like there's this kind of like archetype of this kind of blueprint for prayer that you can like draw a direct line back to, Greco-Roman practices.
I really find like the offerings of the god, like how that translates across so many different religions and then deviates and varies slightly through different people is very, very interesting. One very cool fiction book, but it's a historical fiction and plays around with the sort of Chinese mythology around the time of the Mongolian and Han dynasties. It's called She Who Wrote the Sun. I will get the proper name for it because I just read it and that's very rude of me to have forgotten. It's by Shelley Parker Chan. I can remember her name. And it's a twist on sort of the Mulan fable of it being a daughter who steps into the place of the sun, who is destined for greatness. But in one of the chapters, they purposefully poison their squadron of militia, and they do that by giving them the food that was left out as offerings for the dead, and that's one of the ways that they do that. And I'm going to find the name of the book, but it essentially it acts like a plague, and it's incredible. It's such an interesting twist on that the people, because this character specifically can see the dead, and they can see them like consuming. They're not consuming the food because obviously the food doesn't go anywhere. But
it's similar to
passes
like
that around.
The spirit plate.
Yeah, it's this tampering with something that was destined for ancestors, for the dead, a mark of respect by disrupting that the chain of events that happened. Thank you, Erin.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and that's super interesting because that like pops in my head about like
She who
taking it-
became the sun. Thank you.
he who became okay. That pops back into my head the Trojan horse. So many people have the like misunderstanding that like, oh, they tricked them because they said it was a gift. Like, no, what it says is that they said, this is for our gods, don't fucking touch it. And they knew that they would. They knew that they would be that level of disrespectful. And so it's very interesting, like being able to play on your enemies that way, and how like, again, like that's something that we see across cultures that really didn't have much crossover.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about that particular scene was that they did that to protect the squadron from actually going to fight and actually cause this kind of conflict that they knew would lose and would progress in a way that wasn't to their machinations. So they disrupted it, and it was very, very interesting. I really like that. Also, if you would like to read queer literature about Chinese dynasties and Chinese mythology and history, then She Who Became the Sun, it only came out, I got an arc for it, and it was flipping incredible. Like, oh, Mulan, I'm in. Oh, trans.
Yes.
Gay.
And that's one thing that really like frustrates me, you know, as a person of trans experience, when people want to act like this is new or a fad. Like, no, it's not. We've had like mythologies and like actual like people for ages, like Hermaphroditus in ancient Greek, like that. It's not a great representation because like the myth of Hermaphroditus is that Hermaphroditus was the son of Aphrodite and Hermes, and was a beautiful young man, and like people wanted him, they loved him, and he was just like not really about it, and a water nymph saw him bathing in a private pool at one point, and like wanted him, and he rebuffed her, and so she latched herself onto him and entreated the gods that they should never be separated, and they were made into one person. And later, you know, I can't remember if it was Aphrodite or Hermes, but gifted them the ability to shift at will into the representation that they needed or wanted or felt. And but like this person was worshipped. Like there were shrines to Hermaphroditus. There were like, you know, there were people of trans experience.
The word originates from their name. The word that we use.
Well, we don't use that anymore.
In questionable circumstances, originated from there. But then you have Loki in Norse mythology, who is fluid as fuck. And I mean, at least Disney did the bisexual thing. Thank you.
Nope, we're not doing that, because no, they didn't. I reject it, because here's my thing. Not only are you blatantly doing trans erasure with Sylvie and like trying to serve this like narcissistic thing, you're also trying to cover up the fact that you don't know how to consolidate this character. But also like this kind of throwaway line, kind of blink if you miss it moment, when you already have this character getting drunk in a bar cart. Like you could have just had him drunkenly make out with someone of male presenting nature if you wanted to give us representation. But this kind of hand wavy bullshit, I'm over it.
A great representation of Loki's fluidity is in the Magnus Chase novels, which is the sort of connected novels to Percy Jackson by Rick
Riordan.
Thank you. I knew it was an R, but I couldn't remember what. Through the child of Loki, who is very much gender fluid and doesn't accept one or the other. It's like, oh, today I feel more male, today I feel more female. I'll let you know how I'm presenting that day. And it's never really challenged or questioned. It's just accepted by Magnus, and then it becomes a relationship, which is just beautiful. Sorry, spoilers, but it's beautiful.
It's so good.
When kids books are doing that, and like you have powerhouses that aren't, come on now, guys.
Yeah, I mean, you have
Like, kids can't handle that stuff. They don't understand what it means.
Oh, we
But
already
you don't understand what it means, and you think that kids are stupid because
well, and you also it's also down to the fact that like cis het people pathologically sexualize queer experience. And so like they can't, in their own mind, they cannot separate sexuality and sexual things from queer identity. So they are then sexualizing children and saying that we're the ones doing it. And no, we're not. We're just trying to give children the same vocabulary that cis het children have access to all the time. And you want to talk about us sexualizing children? Have you seen Riverdale?
Also, they're the same people that are like, that girl's wearing a strappy top. You need to send her home because that's unacceptable.
Right.
Her shoulders gonna get everybody in here, Orny. Oh yeah, the shoulders.
Or that are putting their infants in onesies that are like lady killer. And they're like,
and they're the same ones that ask 5-year-olds about their little girlfriends on the playground. Like, but they understand when they do that it's not sexual. Like,
yeah. Oh, it's just cute, isn't it?
Oh, it's creepy.
Bye-bye.
Hello, it's fucking creepy. You know what's cute? Like giving children access to tools to help understand themselves. That's really fucking cute. I think everybody should be wearing that this season.
My friend's daughter, when she was in nursery school, was best friends with a little boy who always came to the dress-up days in princess dresses, and if anybody tried to say anything about him, Lucy was like, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And she's like, she's my queen now. She's 15. She's still my queen.
I love that. Yeah,
she's like really, really small. So she gets like talked down to, and she gets like kept getting knocked back in age. Like people keep just squeezing her down into this younger box, and she's like, please stop that.
Yep. It's like,
but I mean, let's talk about sexualizing children. They had a countdown to when Emma Watson turned 16, and it was a bonker.
When Natalie Portman was in her first movie, there was a countdown to when she turned 18. Yeah. Like, Korea just recently raised their age of consent from 13 to 16. Like, there's this, like, obsession with youth and this, like... It's so gross.
A long time ago, people died when they were 30, but that's not such a problem anymore. So we don't need to focus on that.
Well, and like statistically, that's not as true as we once thought because like it's all balanced out. Because it is an average lifespan was 30, but you had like 15 children for every one adult who died in like infancy or 2 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the average is very skewed.
This is fun.
Yeah, it's wild. And what's also funny is like when we look at those like mean ages, like when we look at those like average lifespans and things like that, like we also like don't really have reliable averages because indigenous cultures weren't included in those things. Like you have people in like parts of India and like indigenous peoples to the Pacific Islands living like long fucking lives. Yeah. But white people weren't concerned with recording that history. And because white people predominate, like, and not in numbers, just in violence. Like,
and let's be real, they were chucking shite out of windows about like 20 years ago, let's be real. So if people were dying, it's probably because you were chucking shit on them as they were walking past.
That's literally why the Black Plague ran so rampant through the fucking European continent, because people were chucking their shit everywhere. They didn't have fucking reliable, like at the time Europeans were doing that. indigenous peoples in the America had fucking aqueducts.
I went to Rhodes in Greece, one of the Greek islands, and there is a sort of the remains of a village that's like over 2,000 years old, and it had plumbing. Plumbing. They had this big bowl at the top that was like dug in and full of water, and they knew to put oil on the top to stop it from evaporating, and then you had the algae that protected it, and then that filtered down through the houses to wash away all the bad stuff. They had toilets. Toilets. Yeah. You had a pan, and you went, "Watch out, Steve!" out the window.
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Same technology.
Yeah.
Advanced. Like the most advanced thing that has happened is what the fucking Japanese have done with bidets. But every other fucking toilet, you use gravity in that bitch. Just the bidet shoots things
just
up.
Gravity.
That's different.
My boyfriend and I were in Paris, and we went to the closest bathroom, which was in the Japanese museum there, and they have the very fancy Japanese toilets. I didn't see him for about half an hour. It's like trying every setting.
They're also heated.
Girl.
So like
I know.
Like that's a little disconcerting because over here, you sit down on a toilet and it is anything but cold. You know someone else's ass has freshly been there. So it's a little freaky. However,
it's too intimate. It's too intimate. I'll make out with a stranger, but I don't want to sit on the toilet seat after you.
But in Japan, that heated toilet seat situation was a lifesaver when it was wintertime because
oh God.
Otherwise my ass would have gotten stuck to several toilet seats. But to prevent someone else's butt being where someone else's butt is, they have these things that rotate around the toilet seat so it's cleaning it. So you're not in someone else's butt spot. That's totally like tangent. But again, like the Japanese toilets, and it has nothing to do with gravity.
I mean, Japanese...
but on this tangent, it's so weird in Japan because they have these bidets and like these fancy ass toilets half of the places, and the other half of the places, it's a hole.
Yeah, it's a squat toilet.
Well, and that's, you know, that's down to like Japan in some ways still very much has like an imperialist, like classist, like mindset. And they like very much have an unofficial like caste system.
Yep.
And so like, yeah. And like, and it's so interesting. Like I learned, you know, not too long ago, like maybe like 2 years ago or so, the reason that, you know, you have in English dubs, the reason you have like people with American Southern accents or like Brooklyn accents in these animes is because they're trying to like, it's an analog for the accent that that person would have in Japan, because that's the thing is like, you know, everybody in Japan doesn't speak the same way, and they have accents just the same that like we do, and they have regional dialects the same that we do. And so it's very interesting when you learn those kinds of things.
Yeah. I had someone in Osaka who refused to speak to me unless I spoke in Kansai-ben. Like a waiter at a restaurant who would not bring me water.
Oh my God.
So specific. There's no like he was being an asshole.
Oh yeah, no, he was being an asshole. I think that was the same restaurant, and it was like in Dotonbury or somewhere. And that I think that was the same restaurant where I went in. I was like, "This is a pretty nice restaurant." He's being a dick. But then I went to the bathroom and there was a spot toilet, and I was like, "Okay, let me balance."
Yeah, the few times
toilet, terrible waiter.
I know.
Few times I tried to speak like Japanese sentences and phrases specifically at the dojo I was training at in Saku. Everyone there was super nice, but like I would try to say something in Japanese and they're like, "Oh, you sound too much like the city. Stop." And I'm like, "I'm sorry." That's not the note I was expecting. I just thought you were going to be like, "You're really bad at Japanese." They're like, "You sound too much like city folk."
That's fair.
Right, I guess. How do you?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a similar phenomenon when like people learn Spanish, particularly when you learn Spanish and then go to Mexico. because spoiler alert, a lot of like Mexican Spanish is actually indigenous words that they have just that the indigenous peoples kind of spoke along with the Spanish, and so it became adopted. And that's the thing is like I was there was a like native content creator that I follow, Show Me Your Mask. I think it's show me_your_mask. She's great. Her main account is banned right now because she was talking about Pipeline 3. But she has a backup account that's like Show Me Your Mask, like 939 or something like that. If you guys want to go check her out, I love her. But yeah, like she was talking about how her grandfather said better to be Mexican than indigenous. Not that those things are different, because spoiler alert, chat, dear listener, being Mexican is an inherently mixed indigenous identity. Like if you are Mexican in ethnicity and not nationality, you're more than likely native. But the, indigenous tribes in Central and South America, after colonization happened, they were able to kind of keep some of their words, and they gave some of their practices a different slant so that they were able to kind of incorporate it into the spirituality and religion being pushed by the Spanish. And so when you go to Mexico and you try to speak this Spanish that you learned through high school and college, you're speaking a colonizer's language. And so they'll understand what you're saying, but they're also going to be like, okay.
Ish.
It's very similar in Quebec with the French and the Quebecois.
French.
My partner is from Quebec, and if you ask him if he speaks Quebecois, he says, "No, I speak French," and there is a thing.
Yeah.
It's a big thing.
We still even like Americans are just shafted when it comes to learning a foreign language in high school and everything, because if you also try to take that same Spanish you learn in high school, middle school here, and go to Spain and speak that, they are going to look at you and kick you out of a restaurant.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't know what the fuck you're doing, but no, you aren't from this region. Like, you're already going to get knocked off because like you're not speaking that region's dialect, which is already but like you start speaking like the bastardized American version of Spanish that is like not anything specific, like no.
Yeah, even just going to like one side of a city to another side of the city, you can encounter so many problems.
And it's so interesting too, because like when you look at things like Quebec, the Quebecos and the French in Quebec is more true to the French that used to be spoken, because the thing about language and etymology is that like languages change over time, especially with trade, and you end up getting loan words. Like there was a word in Japanese for lettuce before it became lettuce. Like there's a different word for it, but because of heavy trade and things opening up, like it became easier to adapt that than it was to just continue using their actual word. And there's stuff like that all over the place.
With French in particular, etymologically, is that the right word?
Etymologically, yeah.
The Kunas Cajun French that my family spoke, because it is so isolated in the swamps, like you don't trade with anyone, it's just your people, is very much like older French, like more of the French that would have been brought over when they first began colonizing.
Well, and so the thing that a lot of people don't know is like Cajuns are white. And like Cajuns are white for a reason. Cajuns came from Canada. They were the French that were like kicked from Canada, and so when the English took it over, they were kicked from Canada and they came down and like with their Canadian accents were like, oh yeah, I'm a Canadian, like in that way. And so you had Creole and Louisiana people at the time. Oh, you're Cajun. You a Cajun. And that's how Cajun became a thing. Creole people are Black. And like there's a little bit more like range of skin tones within Creole culture and within like Creole identity. But yeah, if you're Creole, like you have Black lineage,
Yes.
which is why I maintain that Rogue should be Black. Anyway, because she is Creole, Gambit is Cajun.
I have so many feelings about, like, particularly like going out to restaurants and they're like, it's a Cajun restaurant. And I'm like, okay, I want gumbo. And they serve me this red sauce. And I'm like, that's fine. That is a version of gumbo, but that is Creole gumbo, not Cajun. And that's not what I was expecting, because I'm Cajun and I want
You're Cajun.
It's home food for me. Like, it's comfort food. It's like chicken soup for me. And you serve me, you know, chicken ramen. That's fine, but it's like, not what I was expecting. It's close,
but it's not what I was looking for. Yeah. Yeah. And I make Creole gumbo because like that's what I know, and that's what like I wasn't necessarily like raised up with it, but like I was introduced to it very young, and so like the recipe that I know and the recipe, like everything's in the hand. We don't measure.
Yeah. No. There's no measurements.
No, absolutely not. But
if you're cooking a gumbo recipe that requires measurements, you are doing it wrong.
If you're cooking in my house, or at least for me, if you're cooking and you're using measurements, you're doing it wrong. If you're baking, you have to. But
baking
if you are
science.
Cooking, baking is fucking chemistry.
Yes.
But if you're cooking and you're out here pulling the teaspoon out, child, like it's fine, but half the time when you're measuring, you're not putting enough in anyway. But
I hate it when I'm like, oh, I have this recipe for a really nice curry sauce. Oh, can you just give me that recipe? Okay, you just need these spices.
Throw them together.
But how much of them? Like,
I don't know, to taste. And that's the thing that I learned. That's the thing that I learned recently is like most white people in America like aren't tasting things as they're eating them.
I've been watching a lot of Gordon Ramsay, and that would piss him right off.
Right, because like there's a whole line about it in Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet. Like there's a line where the king is talking about like, I don't trust a cook that won't like lick their finger. And it's both about like the preparedness of the food, but also about plague. So like if the cook isn't tasting the food, they're worried that cook is sick and they don't want to tell anybody. And so, yeah, it's super interesting. And like, we are way the fuck off topic.
How did we get here?
But truly, but like to tie it back in, like there's a lot of myth around food in indigenous cultures as well. Like a lot of like the ways that we do things is passed down because of like stories and knowledge given to us, and like the reasons we do things are very different.
I mean, ham hocks and black-eyed peas and collard greens for New Year's is one of those Appalachian old wives' tales.
For Scots, it's reasonable to put salt in porridge. You would have like a salty oatmeal because the way to preserve it was to cook it and then dry it in sheets with the salt, and then you would that would see you through the winter. You'd smash that up and then reheat. So my granddad, who was was Scottish, would put salt in his porridge. My granny, who was English, made it with sugar.
That's neat. One thing that was interesting to me as I was kind of relearning things and delving back into my like ancestry and ancestral practices is like the food that natives made. And like one thing that was made in Navajo circles was essentially like what was a fruit jerky, where they would take like fresh wild berries and like cook that over the fire and like reduce that to this kind of almost jam like texture, and then would like lay it out as a sheet and like cook that, and it produced this sort of like indigenous fruit roll-up situation. Like, and so it was a lot easier for the hunters to like carry like fresh fruit, like not necessarily fresh, but like foods with them, because they couldn't, take, whole berries with them, because they would end up getting smashed and like all of that. So they could take these and they would have something that would provide them energy, and it was easier to store and carry. Just so fucking neat. Like the ingenuity that we had and the know-how that just
and if you cook fruit down far enough, I'm sure there is a ratio of juice to sugar that becomes shelf stable.
Yep, absolutely. And another practice that I see across a lot of different I just lost it a lot. Oh, is the burying of things like foods. In a lot of indigenous cultures to North America did it, but it was also done in Scandinavian cultures.
Iceland have a fermented shark dish that they bury.
The Irish and the fucking bogs. People would put things in bogs and not put a marker, and so that's why to this day we're finding wild ass shit in bogs. A whole road was just uncovered from a bog recently.
Koreans with kimchi would do the same thing in a hole.
Yeah.
And it
natto again, any fermented stuff in Japan wasn't always directly in the ground, but they made structures or barrels that mimicked the ground that were easier for them to go in and hand mix things, that they were very physical with it. I am going blank. It's not natto. It's a different fermented process, but the woman documentary and Granny, just Obasan, and she would open this casket and she had washed everything, but then she would dip her entire arm in it and just turn this rice something over, and had to deal with tofu. Anyway, she would physically, and the people filming were you don't have gloves? And she's no, oils from skin, good for this. And I was what?
Yeah.
Wild. Again, the chemistry of it was fascinating, but she's it's easier when it's in a barrel in my house. I can keep it the right temperature, and then my oils help it. And she's just sitting there doing this, tossing something over. It was wild.
And it also comes down to the variation that Japan had in temperature. So the ground in the winter gets too hard to dig stuff up, and a lot of the time the things that they were fermenting and preparing were for the winter because it was harder to harvest things. And it's so wild, and the ways that people are trying to erase these practices and things. It has no thought or respect for what's going on. Look at fucking PETA. We hate PETA. PETA are nothing but liars, and they're not what they purport to be at all. But even beyond PETA, there are other groups that are trying to infringe on the hunting rights of Native peoples of the Canadian regions and the Arctic regions. And it's well, why don't you do this or that? Why don't you just go grocery shop for food? Because food is prohibitively expensive in Alaska and the most northern parts of Canada, because everything has to be imported. And the reason that these indigenous peoples mostly subsist on meats is because they can't grow things. They can't grow a lot of edible foods.
So it's very interesting, actually. A part of the reason that the whale was so I had a partner who wanted to do this thing where they just ate all meat, and with no veggies or any supplements. And so doing research, I was that sounds like a not great idea for nutrient balance.
And it's not a great idea for your toilet. That's not going to end well.
No.
Sorry, I should let Lex drink before punchline. Damn, that's 3 times we've made them shit.
Oh my god.
But
so sorry.
In particular, I think it was the whale blubber, though, particularly contains a lot of the niacin, I think it is, and the vitamin C that they don't get from the actual meat itself. And that's one of the reasons why whales were considered so sacred, is because you could get these nutrients that you needed. Like if you just ate any other animal, you would wind up with deficits and deficiencies that made you ill. But if you ate whale and you ate the blubber specifically, you would be healthier overall.
And what is so wild about whaling, and like when white people got a hold of it and started doing it, they didn't do it right at all. And they didn't understand how to do it. And Native people weren't like would have, if you hadn't like tried to fucking kill them, would have tried to help you live. But you know, that whole thing happened, and they didn't understand how to harvest the oil, like the blubber, the fat. They didn't understand how to break it down and harvest it in the correct ways, because it's so thick, and in order to, like, you have to heat it so that it melts so that you can actually harvest it off. But because there aren't abundant trees, so they didn't really know like how to light these fires. They started lighting fucking penguins on fire to burn these fucking whales down, because penguins are actually mostly blubber. And so like they would kill and pile these penguins up on this whale carcass and burn these penguins in order to harvest the fat from the whale, instead of just harvesting the fat from the penguins, like, who were much more abundant than the whales. And like it's wild. Like when you like when we talk about colonizers and like modern science and medicine catching up to indigenous knowledge, like we're fucking serious. Like,
yeah.
What is interesting in sort of like Scotland as well is deer and venison hunting. They do that to cull the numbers, because there's no natural predators for deer. So deer are actually pests, and they eat a lot of the crops. So if you don't go out and cull the numbers, then you lose other vital parts of the ecosystem. And actually they're doing a lot of reintroduction of different species. And I went to the Isle of Carna, which is very privately owned, but they're reintroducing cows onto the island, and because the cows are there and they're eating the crops, it's chasing the deers further out, so it's pushing the deers away, but it's also reintroducing nutrients into the ground. So that balance of the ecosystem, that because the deer were just eating everything, there was no boundaries for the deer. They could just eat piss shit wherever they want, and that was damaging the soil. Like there's all those little like nuances that people don't take into consideration, and just by being like, I'm gonna put some cows there, that'll be all right. If they were like already seeing massive changes into the landscape.
That's
like incredible.
Yeah, that's just like where in California they've reintroduced wolves, and like you know, the ecosystems are now like thriving in a way that they haven't in decades, generations even. And it's so interesting when we look at these things. And also like the British Isles don't have a lot of predatory animals.
Yeah.
Like what is that about? Like that is so wild to me, because what? How did that happen? Because also like, didn't the myth of like, I'm trying to think of like where curious.
Oh, that's me. I was trying to post about Carna, the island.
Rude.
Anyway, Carna, CA-RNA.
We'll
they have
put
a
it through.
conservation.
We'll definitely put it through in a minute. But yeah, like it's just wild to me because like I grew up in America, which is so incredibly diverse as far as like ecosystems are considered. We have like everything from like Arctic temperatures to like subtropical temperatures to deserts to like we have all of these sorts of ecosystems and all of this biodiversity that was incredible, and like other places aren't like it always like baffles me when I'm like, oh no, like the British Isles are wet and green and like low on predators. Like humans are the apex predator.
Mm-hmm.
It's so wild.
Yep. We have
Y'all
some
had to have
snakes.
aquatic predators.
We have otters and seals, and we get the whales.
Yes.
Otters are great. I love them. I've seen otters and seals, which was really cool. Actually saw a lot of otters around the Isle of Connor, which was really nice. And they're so cute. And
When
saw
I went
seals
to
that way too.
Maine, yeah, when I went to Maine, I saw some baby seals. And they're actually, as the tide came in, there was this little like alcove of rocks that made a pool when the tide came in, and there were 2 eels in that pool, like swimming around each other.
Joe, did you have something you were like holding your hand out?
No, the kitten is like, she's violently cleaning my hand.
Oh no.
And like, if I lower my hand too much, she's going to latch onto it, bite it, scratch it, and then clean everything. And she has a very tongue. So I'm going to hold my hand up for a while until she...
No, I just wanted to make sure that if you had something to say, we were not, with the audio issues that we're having, wanted to make sure you were getting your words in. Yeah,
but like bringing it back to, mythology here and storytelling. That's what I like, and we talked a little bit about the blending of those things, but like there are things that like are specific to like Creole and Cajun culture. And like, there are things that are specific to that because it's a melding of, the sort of indigenous stories from Canada that the white people heard and brought, and some of the stuff that they brought with them from Europe, and then the things that they learned within Louisiana. Like, do you have any like any stories that you have like learned through your life about that? Are there any old wives' tales that your grandparents told you?
I mean, I'm sure that there are. Here's the thing. So much of it is just how I grew up, and I don't know anything different.
Yeah.
That I catch myself saying things like, for Easter, we pluck eggs, which apparently no one else does. And no one really knows what it is.
Yeah. So like, tell the people, let's play Pokedex. What is that?
So yeah, like, it's a game. It's a dumb game. It's apparently a really old game from France that has been aged out, but you take your dyed eggs and you have little egg battles.
Oh, we roll ours down a hill. So we take them and paint them and then roll them down a hill. And then whoever's is most intact at the end is the winner.
Yeah, my grandfather used to cheat and super glue the ends of his eggs.
Beautiful.
Brilliant.
Such a granddad power move.
Fucking brilliant. That's so funny.
Obviously there's the Christmas crackers that are so common in Europe that still survive as a part of the Cajun culture. The garçonneries are something that I think is very native to Creole cultures specifically. There are a couple of things with houses, in fact. So a lot of houses in South Louisiana will have 2 front doors to confuse the spirit.
Yes. Well, that's similar to in Japanese, they say moshi moshi because it's to confuse kitsune.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So you'll have like a corner on your front porch, and you'll have a front door here and then a front door here. And they'll go to like different rooms even to confuse the spirits. And then if you have like a more traditional house that doesn't have that corner front porch, often there is a staircase that goes upstairs from the outside. And that's where any boys in the family would sleep, so that they were also like, you were protecting the rest of the house because there was a second entrance. So there's always a double entrance in pretty much any South Louisiana, like Cajun culture sort of home that you go to. There's always a second door.
That's super interesting. That reminds me of the witch windows that you see in like the Pennsylvania area, which is if for those unfamiliar, witch windows are these sideways like long windows that look super out of place, but the thought behind it is that the witch couldn't fly her broom into it. Although, like, fun fact, flying on a broom came from the practice of putting certain oils and botanicals on the end of a broomstick and inserting them places. And so witches flew on a broomstick because they would do like solanaceae blends or like henbane, like different medicinally poisonous plants that they knew how to use properly in order to get the desired effects. It's not the same, but similar to the practice of like using peyote in the presence of a medicine man and going on a journey in that way. Like they weren't just like getting high, like they did this in ritual space. Like this was, a way to connect, and it was a part of their spirituality. And so like it like stuff like that is just super interesting, and the etymology of phrases like that, like flying on a fucking broomstick, like. Oh,
Thematically
man.
with witches, less about flying on brooms, but still modes of transport. My friend lives in Hull, and I got a folklore and superstitions map, and I found all the places that my friends live, obviously, just to see what was going around there. That's the first thing I did. And in Hull, there's a little recommendation that you should smash your eggshells so that a witch can't turn them into a boat. And I mentioned it to her, and she was like, "I've always smashed my eggshells. I didn't know why." And like,
that's interesting.
So cool. Such a weird thing to have prevailed, and she didn't know why she did it. She just knew that she did it. And that's
because I was familiar with fairies. I was familiar with fairies using eggshells as boats, but I was not familiar with like witches using eggshells as boats, which is actually really interesting because like as somebody who practices, like eggshells are actually used a lot in like protective magic and things like that. You boil them, you separate the membrane, and then you crush it into a fine powder, and like you use eggshell powder. Lots of people use it in wards or other types of protective magic. So that's super interesting to me. I
would unfold the map, but it's very big. Just be here for like just to find it. But it is just like two little lines right next to Hull, and Hull's a port town. Very much in the way of like that sort of sea mythology and stuff like that, which is very cool. But yeah, witch boats.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, like port towns is where you get some of the most interesting folklore and mythologies, because you have peoples from all over the world like coming there ostensibly, and some of them set up shop and live there, and so like parts of their culture kind of invade and become pervasive throughout everyone else, and it just becomes like a part of it. Like that's what's going on in Appalachia and all of those things is like
Dublin
all of these people.
Sorry. I was just going to say Dublin has a very big Viking influence for that very reason, because they were kind of like looking for America, got a bit lost. Looks all right. Park up here. So you can see a lot of cool Viking shit in Dublin.
Yeah.
So harkening back a little bit to our earlier conversation about how mythology, like everywhere, has this is going to tie in a bunch actually, like a flood myth, and then all of these cultures have these very similar mythos, like vampires and werewolves and various versions. They're different in each culture, but there's almost a version of one in almost every culture.
Like Japanese has an aswang, I think is what they're called.
There's several different kinds of yokai that's
true. Are vampiric. Yeah.
That is how to say that.
So there have been studies done within like the horror movie genre that talk about how different mythos become really popular when the society is facing different struggles.
Yes.
And so it's very interesting to me, and I haven't looked into it enough. So I'm definitely not like purporting to be like, I'm not going to give any real information aside from like, let's talk about this thing. But the idea that these mythos probably or might have come about because of different societies facing kind of the same challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you see, you know, a huge uptick in like, you know, vampire or vampiric adjacent folklore, you know, having existed for a really long time, but you see a huge uptick in it with tuberculosis. And you see a huge uptick in, you know, the way that, oh, like they don't look monstrous, they look like people, because when they were like digging these people up, it had been so cold that they're taking them out of this freezing ground. So the body is remarkably well preserved. So they're like, you're getting up at night and eating people. Like, when really, no, those people had just come into contact with them and contracted tuberculosis. And yeah, it's really interesting. And like, the different ways that, things pop up, and like, the folklore, especially around like death, dying, and afterlife.
Zombies is a big one too.
Zombies. Yes. Well, and there's like zombies are a real thing, but like Hollywood took it and made it something completely different and gross. But like, yeah, like zombies are a real thing. It's just not, you know, what Hollywood has made it into. Like it's wild. Like, and so fascinating, like for so many reasons. And I think, you know, it's all well and good to like make these adaptations and like have fun and like play with these things, but like we need to do it from a place of respect. And it's so telling when we look at the mythologies that are treated with respect and that are treated with a bit of a reverence. When we look at Arthurian legend, you know, that's something that has progressed and changed as it was more and more Anglicanized, because, you know, it's originally a Celtic myth.
Yep. My favorite Celtic myth.
Right?
Oh,
it's so good. But as like various like Christian authors like took it and put in their little fanboy self-insert knights, like things changed and changed and changed.
There is an adaptation that's just come out of Gwen and the Green Knight with Dev Patel, and I really want to see it.
I'm very into seeing that. I am going to watch it very soon.
We need to time when we watch it and then have a chat, like a big discussion about it, please.
I love that. Absolutely. We can make this happen.
Yeah. Arthurian legend do you know what? I'm going to take back my earlier statement. Arthurian legend is probably my intro into any sort of mythology. And like, we went to Cornwall when I was a kid, and we went to Tintagel, which is like the Merlin caves. We went to all these places. I live like half an hour away from a place called Arthur's Seat, for crying out loud. Like, that is supposed to be his resting spot on the top of a now extinct volcano. So like, my immersion into like my whole life as a storyteller started with Arthurian legend. I can't believe I forgot it. I've betrayed them. I'm so sorry.
Well, okay, so like I also have to make a retraction, because my first introduction to mythos, especially a broad one, was actually gargoyles. The Disney Channel show. And
I'm gonna take a Lisa Mazza cosplay to Dragon Con.
Oh my god, yes.
Yes to gargoyles.
Gargoyles.
Can I come to Dragon Con?
Please do. Please do. Because, okay, like, so gargoyles,
Right now.
a little bit problematic because we are taking these, in later seasons, spoiler alert, but like it's a cartoon series from the 90s. So if you haven't seen it, it's on Disney Plus and Amazon. And go to Amazon if you don't want to give the mouse money. But we don't want to give Bezos
But
money
then do we
either.
want to give it to Bezos?
Exactly. It's like, but like you can't find a
Bezos.
fucking box set of it anywhere. So like, but the thing about gargoyles, it was incredible and incredibly progressive and liberal for its time. Its main character, Elisa Maza, is half native, half black. The gargoyles were incredible, and Goliath is a black man. Like, I don't care that they gave him white skin when he was turned into a mortal. That's a black man.
Yeah.
But yeah, like gargoyles, at first we just follow the gargoyles as they are adjusting to modern life. But in later seasons, we are introduced to other creatures and other folklore, because the whole thing with gargoyles, it's that there are three races. There are gargoyles, mortals, and the children of Avalon. But they took Children of Avalon and just kind of made it very broad, so that even Anansi and Odin and Coyote get kind of absorbed into Children of Avalon. And that's where it's like, ooh, this is colonization. But they do handle those specific, like they give those stories their own moment to shine. Like I think they did, like with Coyote's episode by himself, like it was really well done.
It was. Really was. You have like base, because across like different groups, Coyote and Crow are ironically base figures across multiple tribes' mythos, and they did a really good job showing that push and pull between those two archetypal characters. And you kind of come out of the episode going, wait, who is the bad guy? And that's the point.
Right. Really, you come out of it going, Xanatos is still the bad guy.
Why is one of like the greatest evil lines of all time coming out of evil Riker, in the first freaking episode of that show. Like,
if you pay a man enough, he'll walk barefoot through hell. Holy shit!
Yep.
Shit, or like Chaucer, or like something. No, freaking 90s cartoon, man.
It was so good. And like the episode handling Anansi was done super well. And like both of these episodes were centered around Elisa, because this was happening when they had to go to Avalon to defend the children that they had left. So, okay, backtracking a little bit to explain gargoyles. They were attacked by Vikings. They were betrayed by the person who's supposed to protect the castle. Really, he was just trying to betray the people who lived in the castle, but the Vikings said, no, we're killing the gargoyles too. And so they killed most of the gargoyles, but luckily they had their eggs in the rookery underground, so the Vikings didn't know about them. And there were a couple of grown gargoyles under there. And so the grown gargoyles go to get revenge. They get revenge. The princess is like, oh, I'm so sorry. I got your friends turned into stone. How can I make it up to you? And he's like, protect our eggs. And then he gets himself turned into stone, and they're turned into stone until the castle rises above the sky. So that's what Xanatos does. He transports this castle brick by goddamn brick all the way to New York City on top of a skyscraper so it can be above the clouds. Later on, we find that the princess and those eggs was transported to Avalon in order to escape persecution, and are now being attacked by a wizard that Goliath had wronged, blah, blah, blah. But he hadn't really wronged him. He exacted justice. Anyway, they've hatched, and so truly. Especially a white one. But as Goliath and Elisa are trying to return, and his daughter Angela is coming with them, they're leaving Avalon, but when you leave Avalon, you don't go where you want, you go where you need to be. And so the stories, including Coyote and Anansi, were both where Elisa needed to be because she needed to reconnect with her heritage and her, spirits. And like, that's what that provided her. And like they tell these really beautiful stories, and they do a good job. Like even Odin is handled well. It's literally just the like making it all children of Avalon. That's the problem.
Asterisks to all this gargoyle stuff. There's technically 3 seasons. Don't watch the 3rd season. Don't put yourself through that horrendous experience. It's just season 1 and season 2. And it just was tragically canceled at season 2 is how we look at that.
Yeah, because what happened is the original writer and showrunner for Gargoyles was hella liberal and was trying to do what he should have, but by Disney standard, he was doing too much. And they were like, "You're gone, but we're keeping Gargoyles." And so it really, like, the show takes an entirely different direction.
That doesn't sound like Disney at all. I'm really shocked by this.
I don't believe it.
And literally, he talks about how Lexington was supposed to be gay. Like, he wanted Lexington to be a queer icon. And like, he should have been.
Cute. He would have been.
He would have been fucking precious. Like... And he's this cute, and like I mean, you can't really apply twink to a monster, but like he's a twink, and like he's a fucking nerd, and like he was the gargoyle that was all about learning about human culture and learning about technology and like really immersing himself in everything. And so it was really neat. Like they all had very neat personalities and neat cultures, and I think it was super neat because like gargoyles are a mythos that not a lot of cultures have. Like gargoyles are fairly specific. And so to kind of bring them into this and like really bring them to life was really beautiful and interesting. Because I believe gargoyles are originally like a Scots thing, aren't they?
They're definitely UK based. My biggest interaction with gargoyles was actually when I lived in York, because the Minster is absolutely covered in them. And then also they have very similarly like cats on like in places where you would expect gargoyles to be. They have those up and down the streets too.
That's interesting. Egyptians also had a similar thing with cats. They weren't... The Mummy... listen, we love the movie The Mummy. We do. It's incredible. But their interpretation of the way cats worked in the Egyptian spirituality is very, very wrong. They weren't... Yeah. They weren't guardians of the underworld. They were essentially tattletales.
We know
it was like, I'm gonna get Anubis on you. Like very, very much that energy.
Well, would be very offended.
You have Ketsi in Celtic mythology as well, which is like the walking across graves, stealing all the souls, taking them.
Yeah, and like I don't know if this is a thing across America, but certainly in the American South and in the regions of Appalachia, they talk about cats stealing a baby's breath.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
The reason I responded to that is, so kind of hearkening back to the question that Erin was answering of like, what are the things that I grew up with that I didn't quite know was... So I did not realize like the intricacies and small nuances of like the more native side of my family and Hispanic things from my father's side until being around my husband's family, who are very, very white, lovingly, very white. And his grandmother freaked out when she found out that my parents let their big giant yellow tomcat sleep with me as a baby, because she was like, "You're so lucky it didn't steal your soul." And I was like, what the fuck is that?
Yeah. Like
from
that
perspective, he was my guardian, that he was there to protect me from anything else coming in the house. But for her, coming from different background, she was like, oh, lucky he didn't steal your soul. How does a cat?
Yeah.
What?
There's this whole mythos in the Americas about cats stealing someone's breath. And I'm honestly not entirely sure where it comes from because I haven't looked into it too much. But I know like the practical reason for it is because occasionally, like, cats are good with kids, but not all cats are. Like, and what can happen, especially because cats are super curious, and with their own young, they sit on top of them. And so with babies, a lot of the times what would happen is they'll sit on babies' chests or on babies' faces, like too close to babies' faces, and the baby can't get good breath because the nasal passages are so small. And most of the time you had pacifiers in the baby's mouth, or, you know, like the baby couldn't breathe through its mouth because the cat was there. So it would effectually steal the child's breath. But like, I'm sure there's like a deeper myth behind it, because they like, it's like people don't like put their children, like their small infants, around cats. Like if there's a cat in a home, like they will hold their infant the whole time. And it's so wild to me.
Launch straight from that into like the whole black cat thing.
Yeah.
So says the individual that has 3 of them, and I've just fully accepted what that means in life. Whoops.
It means your life is super enriched.
Yes. I have lots of luck around me and a lot of protection. I'm fine.
Exactly.
Well, Cat C was a black cat with a little white patch on its tummy. Well, chest.
Yeah. And that is Heverin. Heverin boy has a little bitty white, like few streaks of white right here, and that's it.
Yes.
I have one white whisker, but I think it fell out. And yeah.
Like the stuff surrounding cats is super interesting. Especially like as it pertains to like some indigenous tales, because like we didn't have domesticated cats, but we had wild cats. Like a lot of like one of the major North American megafauna was the saber-toothed tiger. Like, and that's what's so weird. And the last living North American megafauna is the moose.
Yeah. Can we just pause there? Because people do not understand how big moose are.
Moose can run 40 miles per hour in 6 feet of snow.
Easy. And like, bison are big. Don't fuck with bison, but moose are bigger.
Moose are bigger than bison. And if you hit a moose going 40 miles per hour in your car, the moose will be fine, but you're fucking dead. Like, moose kill more people than sharks.
Because most people, they've seen video of like bison coming up to cars, and they're about the same size as an SUV. Like a small SUV Jeep kind of thing. That's the size of a bison. The bison will probably weigh a little more than the vehicle. Moose are bigger.
Moose are bigger.
Yep.
Moose will dive 20 feet deep in water just to eat the vegetation at the bottom.
Yep.
Like help. And
they're fucking terrifying and amazing. And I, respect them completely. The indigenous peoples that like hunted them, mad respect, like could not be me. Like, oh my God. Like I would rather go up against a bear than a moose, honestly.
I mean, to be fair, the moose makes the bear look like, a house cat.
That's easy. That's easy. The bison, no longer intimidating.
No, like we domesticated them. Like, no, like
one of those other things about the plains that people don't want to acknowledge.
Right. Like the plains people, the tribes of the plains, like were incredible when it came to not only like their agriculture, but the way that they like worked the fauna as well. Like the bison migration pattern was completely shaped by human intervention. And it's just wild. Wild, absolutely insane. Oh, back to cats. Yeah. But like native people with cats, like there are stories and there are knowledges of like, cats speaking. And even to this day, like there are cats, like if you have a domesticated cat, like listen to it, because sometimes instead of just straight meowing, they make these noises that almost mimic a child's cry, and it's incredibly like eerie, and so like there are lots of like tales that revolve around dark individuals using things like that and doing things like that, and that I hate to reference Pocahontas because like I have a very complicated relationship with that. But the whole, line about the grinning bobcat, like that's a thing, like that's a spirit, that's a tale that we had.
Bobcat is one of those archetypes. Cougar is archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the cat people and creatures. Nothing really more. What happened? His shit over here in the kitchen. I'm sorry. Just stop it. Sorry. My mom calls me a cougar because I married him.
Fatal robber.
Out of curiosity, what's the age difference?
6 years.
That's the same as me. Me and my bully toy Canadian.
Oh my God. But yeah, like honestly though, like I mean that's less significant. Like it's not that he hasn't been a cradle robber. Like to each their own in kind. Like but no, like and also like let's talk about the fact that like just to sit on this for a second. The age difference between 36 and 30 or 26 and 20 is like very different from the age difference between 24 and 17.
Oh yeah.
It's very different.
Yep.
But anyway, moving back to like all of these things, like there's so much that like survived. Like there's so much knowledge that survived, but like it didn't at the same time, right? Because we know these things and we have these tales and we have these sayings, but we don't know why. Like I still don't know where like your palm itching meaning money is coming to you comes from. Like,
we have a funny variation on that. If you have an itchy palm, it's left to leave, right to receive. So left means you're giving money away and right means you're getting money.
That's the one I've heard.
Yeah.
Okay, I had never heard that specific.
An itchy nose means you're going to get in a fight. That's another one that my mom does.
For us, a shiver running down your back means someone walked over your grave.
Yeah, that's one of ours, and that's tied to Ketsy.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Because the cat goes over the graves, and Ketsy is also probably the reason why we think cats have 9 lives, because there's a mythology of it being a witch who could turn into a cat 9 times, and that was the time with that.
Yes, I remember. Erin Mankey taught me about that. And that yeah, like there's so many wild, and like what's so interesting to me is like like part of my like Celtic heritage, like the banshee. And like number one, it's really funny because it's kind of a pun because her name just means fairy woman. And but originally, they only cried for the noble families, the what five high clans, or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering it.
I'm a little less up to date with Irish than
got you
in particular, but it sounds good.
But then
my
what
Irish
happened
friend
is
isn't here to tell me off, so I'll say it is.
If you're Irish in the chat, tweet at me at Lex Stop Talking, and I will do a correction.
And it will just be Lex Stop Talking.
Like Lex, shut the fuck up. But yeah, originally like she only cried for noble families until like clans started intermarrying and like that sort of kind of like broke down, and then her cry was kind of like for anybody. So if you hear it, like you don't need to. And there's
book.
Yes, and there's another mythology I know in the Isle of Cork about a white woman and seeing a white woman, especially by a river, like you don't need to go home and you don't need to be alone because that foretells of your death.
Yeah.
And like it can be avoided, but you have to alter your path. And so like, but there are lots of things like that. Like for some tribes, the owl is both a keeper of time and a messenger of death, and it's not a dark thing. And like colonization kind of tried to turn the owl into a dark spirit, and no, like in all honesty, like it was a good thing because it gave you that time to prepare, and it allowed you that kind of okay, we got to get things right. We got to get things in order. We got to know what we need to do.
Yeah, the owl was never about malevolence. It was, this is knowledge that you need at this moment.
Well, the owls tied in with Athena in a lot of retellings, which would then be that link to wisdom.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, and I think it also, goes back to, the way these communities thought about things. So like with a lot of like Indo-European, knowledge, mythologies, and spiritualities, death was a little bit more final and was and because it tended to be a little bit more individualistic, that death was seen as such a negative. So like spirits who foretold of death were not liked, and you didn't really engage with them. That's why there aren't a lot of myths about Persephone and about Hades, is because people were afraid to kind of get their attention. They didn't want especially Persephone's attention turned on them. But like in a lot of, indigenous spiritualities, especially like in the Americas and in Africa's, like spirits related to the afterlife and the passage of life were a lot more revered and a lot more like it. And it's not that, Europeans didn't respect their death spirits and deities, but they feared them. Whereas, in Native American cultures, they were more welcomed. Like it was a solemn welcome for sure, but it was a recognition of like, this isn't the end of this person. They're joining the spirits. They're going to be with the creator, and the creator will, depending on your tribe and your spirituality, do different things, and different things might happen. But it wasn't this huge negative. Like it was definitely sad, and you definitely grieved both individually and as a community, but it wasn't the end of that person as it was a lot of the time in these other more European spiritualities.
I did a quick look up, and the Banshee, so Walter Scott did a book called Letters on Demonology and Witchcraft in the 1800s, and he believed that they like specifically visited Highland families, so like the nobles or the higher ups, the landowners, the lairds.
The
lairds.
Lairds.
Yep.
Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I knew that there was a basis for that. I just couldn't remember like.
It's interesting that it came from Sir Walter Scott, and also like I kind of need that book.
Yeah. I love that. But yeah, I think, going back to what I was like, because I got distracted by gargoyles. But like when we, I think it's important that we like bring these things into light, and that we talk about these things, and that we get to, kind of play in these worlds and play with these concepts, but it's about doing it with respect, right? So like if the only things you know about a Native American spirit are the things that you read on Wikipedia, like maybe don't, bro.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with like the spiritual practices, right? Like white sage is sacred to Native tribes. Like, leave it the fuck alone. You can use desert sage, you can use red sage, you can use rosemary, you can use lemon, you like there's all sorts of other things. What?
Sorry. Do I need to send you upstairs?
Oh,
It's endangered.
mom and dad are fighting.
Also, lavender.
Lavender, yes. Yes, and white sage is endangered because like
Overharvested.
Yeah.
I get so like we'll do a whole another episode on like witchcraft and spirituality and magic, but I get so angry because people talk about, oh, there's been so much solidarity with like Indo-European pagans and native peoples, and I'm like, like it's white new agey witches that are coming around and over harvesting white sage and making it endangered because they're doing what colonizers and white people have always done, which is not practice it properly. They see the thing that they want, they see the aesthetic that they like, and they take it without any knowledge of how to actually implement it. And that's why so many species are endangered. That's why salmon are so fucking small now. That's why white sage is endangered, because not only are you over harvesting these things, you're also wiping out the ecosystem with don't get me started on how bitter I am about cars. Like, there's so much about like society that I'm so bitter about, because like America had a whole like interconnected rail system that was one of the most sophisticated in the world, but Henry Ford and General Motors were allowed to buy it all up and destroy it, and then they said, here you go, you have buses now, or you can buy a car. Which, fun fact, is why America has the term colored people time, because Black Americans had a really hard time with car ownership and being able to own a car because of racism. And so they had to rely on these shitty ass public, transportation systems. So it was really hard for them to get where they're going, especially when their communities were serviced less by these buses, and they had to like relegate themselves to a small area of the bus. So not all of them would fit on the bus that needed to get where they were going. But anyway, that's a separate diatribe, and I'm breathing again. Going back to like, we need to approach these things with respect. So like, if you're not somebody who like has researched the thing or has been invited into the spirituality and like genuinely knows about it, don't write about it. But what you can do is, if you think it's important that these stories are told, is like, look in these communities. Like, if you're a writer, I'm sure you're a member of a bunch of writing groups on Facebook, or you have a Discord where you do things, or you have a Nano account where you like challenge each other to like writing sprints and things like that. So like, reach out in these communities and say, hey, are there any Indigenous authors who are wanting to write about these things and use these stories and are having a hard time? Let me boost you. Let me give you a platform. I think it's super important to, reach out to the communities to whom these stories belong. And, if you can't find anyone and those stories interest you, look into things that are more open, because there are things that, they're not going to be the same, but they're like, we've been talking about this whole time. Cultures across the world have similar archetypes and similar stories to be told, because, spoiler alert, the human experience is not incredibly unique and individualistic. Like, yes, we are all people with our own lenses through things, and when we experience, like, we can experience the same type of trauma, but it can do profoundly different things to us. But we will have a story that is rooted in the same thing. So like look at those things, just like burning sage. Instead of burning white sage, burn red sage, burn rosemary, burn lavender. Like lantana spreads faster than little nos down that pole, honey. Like you can repopulate that very easily. Like, and so like you want to tell a vampire story? Absolutely. You want to tell a shapeshifter story? Absolutely. Don't touch indigenous stuff. Like
it's going to get messy really fast. There's
It's a good exercise to look into the area that you're from and find specific stories that are linked to the area and revitalize that. Like, you don't have to borrow from other people to find something interesting. There's probably a variant very close to home that you've just never considered because you don't think that you live in an interesting enough place. And you might actually find, hey, I was looking for vampires, but I found these guys. They're even better. Like, this is very interesting. Like, nobody's touched on these because they're so unique to where I live. Like, you won't know that unless you actually go looking for it.
Yeah. Very much that, right? Like there are stories from Appalachia that nobody knows because they're so isolated and they just tell these stories within their own community, and they're very mistrustful of outsiders because every time outsiders have come to Appalachia promising this, promising development, promising that, all they do is underpay the people that live there, rape the land, and leave. Like, so they're very mistrustful of outsiders, and like rightfully fucking so. Just like indigenous communities are very mistrustful of outsiders, rightfully so. Like,
yeah.
And, also,
and so like,
if you come across myths or stories that you're not quite happy with how the ending turns out, or you don't like the personification of something, look elsewhere. Don't try to change what that is.
Oh yeah.
Already discussed like the plethora of reasons why Europeans don't like cats. Whereas again, over in Japan, maneki neko, the waving cat, like cats are seen as lucky. In different kinds of cats personify different kinds of luck. But like everyone knows about maneki neko, waving cat, and like beckoned the traveling monk near him, and so thus he wasn't attacked by bandits, blah, blah, blah. But cats are freaking lucky over in Japan, and they have some cute stories about cats over there. And
absolutely. And dear listeners, we do have joining us in the 11th hour, Emily and Nicole, friends of the show, for fellow creators here at Novi. So they're going to join us here in the 11th hour. But yes, back to what you were saying. We'll have them in here in a second.
Oh, no, that was it. That, okay. Don't try to change one culture's story because it doesn't quite fit whatever narrative you're constructing. Do more research and look beyond that one lens into another place to see a different perspective that might align with what you're wanting more.
And even within that same like culture, like move over a little bit and you might find a different telling. So just be specific about who your inspiration was, like where it came from. Because like we've already discussed, there's several different myths of Persephone's descent. There are several different myths of how Patroclus and Achilles worked out. And hi, Nicole!
Hello! Hey, Emily's in the bathroom because we just drove like 45 minutes from the concert we were just at.
Oh my God, what concert were you at?
Well, I bought tickets for Emily's birthday to fly her out to New York to see the band that I got her into, Keep Flying.
Yes.
Hey.
And
so she had to fly to see Keep Flying.
Yes. It looks like I just showered because we ended up being right in the front of the stage. My knees are like all scuffed up from the stage.
Oh my God.
We have no voices. And we're doing it all over again tomorrow.
Yay.
Nice.
Incredible. That is a sign of a good ass time.
I heard a little bit of the talk, and you know how I feel about mythology and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And like it's something that's always going to like it's part of our DNA. And like storytelling is so intrinsically human, right? Like it's something like people might say that they don't like mythology or that like especially like when you're coming from a Christian lens because Christianity has a tendency to be super fragile. But like the thing is like you do like mythology. Are you into comics? Do you read X-Men? That is at this point a mythology. Like it's not something that's backed by a spirituality, but it is a whole mythos. Like
I feel like just any sort of storytelling that comes from a community of people is just that can be, you know, and even musicians, like we were just at this concert, like the album that this band put out from start to finish, track 1 to track 6, a complete story. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it becomes just over the course of like word of mouth. And you just keep telling me stories over and over and over again. And it becomes this beautiful thing that just keeps getting passed on to generation. It's lovely. Wait, Emily wants to say hi.
Do I?
Come say hi.
Hello. Oh, God.
Hello.
Hi.
Look at you with your middle part.
This is very wet hair.
This is the most
basically like we showered.
This is the most Stevie you've looked in a long time.
Oh my God, truly.
It's full Stevie.
You do look like Stevie right now.
That's valid. That's valid. I'll take it.
No, yeah. Genuinely, like storytelling is as much a part of the human experience as sickness and marriage and like
we have
like relationships,
lullabies,
you know?
and bedtime stories and songs that kids sing when they're in the playground. Those are all mythology.
Yeah, I just remembered
Orations.
You brought up lullabies. I just remembered one of the things that is very Cajun and that no one else knows, and it's the creepiest fucking lullaby.
And you got to give it to us. That's the best. That's the best thing to kind of wrap this up. Give us a creepy lullaby.
My dear, did you know that a long time ago there were 2 little children whose names I don't know, were stolen away on a bright summer's day and left in the woods, so I've heard people say. And when it was night, so sad was their plight, they sighed and they sighed, and they bitterly cried. The poor little dears, they laid down and died. And when they were dead, the robin so red brought strawberry leaves and over them spread. And all the day long he kept singing this song. Poor babes in the woods, poor babes in the woods.
No, that's crazy.
Why do I have
the morning here? Do you know what's going to happen to me?
Oh my God.
It's fine, everyone. The sky is light again. I'm okay. It's all right.
Oh no! Now that Erin has cursed us.
Yeah, like
genuinely, do you know what I feel in my bones? I feel that is something that the French sung about Romani and just got brought over to Canada and then got brought down to Cajun culture. Like I feel that in my bones.
Oh.
I don't know the origin of it, but that is a song that I grew up with and a lullaby that I grew up with. It was actually my youngest sister's favorite song when she was a kid. And when she was like 4 years old, she'd go, Mom, sing the Babe in the Woods song. Mom, sing the Babe in the Woods song.
That would be Danny's favorite song. Like, absolutely. that is a wonderful place to wrap it up tonight, dear listeners.
Now that we have nightmares. Thanks.
I hope you're listening to this as you go to sleep, dear listener. Just be lulled by all the stories of our people. And I want to remind everyone watching the live stream that you can tip us now and we will match donations to Stop Pipeline 3. If you are listening to this. If you are listening to this on YouTube or you are listening to this on the podcast, you can go to stoppipeline3.org directly and donate. You can sign petitions through there. And what Pipeline 3 is, for those who don't know, it is an awful fucking project that violates multiple treaties, that is endangering our Indigenous women and is endangering our largest fresh water supply here in the United States of America, because it is cutting through the Mississippi River through no less than 3 places, not to mention several other fresh bodies of water. And the thing that makes this so concerning is the fact that they are specifically pumping tar sands, which is the dirtiest form of crude oil that exists. It triples the carbon dioxide output because they have to go through an entire chemical process in order to clean it, to even make it viable. And so when this pipeline springs a leak, because it is not a matter of if, it is never a matter of if with pipelines,
It's already
it is a matter of when.
Times.
And so with tar sands specifically, it is harder to detect and harder to clean because it is not pure oil. It has heavy sediments and heavy chemicals and heavy metals in it that when the pipeline leaks, it will seep to the bottom and mix in with the sediment and be carried through every ecosystem down the Mississippi River, completely devastating biodiversity and ruining our crops and the Gulf of Mexico even further, which just was on fucking fire. So please call your representatives, donate if you're able, sign petitions, do the prayers, do the work. If you're able to get out to the front lines, please go do your research. There are some camps that you need to be invited to, but they desperately need support. Our water protectors are being illegally arrested. They are being shot. And the police are being paid to do this by Enbridge, the company doing this. And I don't want to hear one goddamn word about jobs or the economy, because almost every cent from this and every ounce of this oil is going back to France. It's going to France. It's not even going to Canada. Enbridge is a Canadian company, but the oil is going to France. So please, do the thing that is right and responsible, not only for Indigenous lives, but your own life, and stop this pipeline. Thank you so much to all of my guests, and I'm going to throw it to Joe first to plug what we want to plug and say goodbye to the dear listeners.
Thanks for hanging out, everyone. This was fantastic and fun. If you want to find me on social media, you can find me on Instagram. I am Little Star Girl, all one word. And the one thing I would like to plug is that I also, in whatever spare time I have, I work for a nonprofit called Solid Stance, and we bring martial arts and that set of it's late. My brain just dumped. We bring.
Don't talk to me about late. Don't talk to me about late.
It's not late for you. It's early.
My bad. That's not correct.
Bring martial arts and community outreach to disenfranchised children and people across Central Arkansas area, with a larger mission to go national at some point. And we are an official 501c3 nonprofit with federal status. That came in this week. Oh my God.
I learned about that today. Yay.
Yeah. On top of helping out with Stop Pipeline 3, go to solidstance.org and check out that cute little mission that is going on as well.
Absolutely. Erin, what do you have for the people? Your final remarks.
Don't listen to creepy lullabies for sleep. It's not recommended. Follow me.
What are you talking about? I exclusively listen to folklore and true crime to go to sleep.
All right. Well, I mean, like if you like true crime, definitely give me a follow at Erin Go Play for things that might come later. Also, just give me a follow at Erin Go Play. I stream specifically story-based gaming on Tuesdays usually, unless I'm sick. But follow me at Erin Go Play for those updates, and that's all I got.
Yes, Nicole and Emily, you came in last, so we'll let you plug real quick, and we'll save the new blood for last.
So you can follow me on Twitter at Nicole the Nerdy.
You can find me at Neurotic Good.
We belong to.
Sorry, there's a dog here.
My dog is trying to join in on the conversation.
You can find Darth Revan in some Star Wars bullshit.
Yeah. Both of us are on the Legends of Lanamora podcast, which is a part of Novi Studios, as well as What's What with Dilly and Dally, which is the two of us. Who's Dally? Who's Dilly? We don't even know.
Everything is meaningless.
Time is a construct that means nothing.
And then our very special first time guest, and super, super excited about the secret special things that are going to be coming from her. Kim, what do you have to leave with the people?
You can find me on Twitter at KGT Rights, so Kilo Golf Tango Rights. I used to work and travel, can you tell? I have lots of opinions, mostly nonsense, but you can find me. If you like folklore and you like mythology, there's going to be things coming your way. I want to start taking trips around Scotland where I live to find out more about my heritage and what was lost and what was browbeaten out of me by the damn English.
The fact that the indigenous language of the Isle of Man and the Isle of Wight and like Welsh, like all almost like, and the Isle of Wight, like that language is functionally extinct. Like it's only spoken on that island.
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry.
Anyway, England, you're fine. It's whatever. Anyway, yeah, KGT Rights. That's me on Twitter. That's me on Instagram. That's me.
Yeah. And as always, dear listener, if you haven't had enough of me here or on my streams on Friday, you can find the podcast, the official podcast Twitter at Lex Stop Talking. Or you can, if you really, really need my attention, you can find me on my personal Twitter at AU Plated Garbage. That is golden plated garbage for all of you physics nerds out there. And yeah, I'm around. I have my own podcast, and there are several things in the works that are coming. So be sure to follow Novi Studios if you want to be in the know. And as always, dear listener, thank you for joining the conversation. And remember that the only thing you owe anyone is the kindness you owe yourself.